Welcome to the Bloody Disgusting Network. The ensuing show will change, transform, and otherwise alter you. Good luck.
My friendship to all of you precludes my involvement with any one of you. But if you wanna make love, then I do too, and I'll be right there behind you. All in the name of oh, all in the name of oh, all in the name of oh.
Greetings, constant listeners, and welcome to another episode of The Losers Club, a Stephen King podcast presented by Bloody FM, the #1 horror podcast network in the world. I'm your host, Michael Monroeville Mall Rothman, but where we're going, we don't need malls. They don't even exist yet, because today, your losers are heading to Lisbon Falls, Maine, to dial the clock back to 1958, specifically Tuesday, September 9th, 1958. A time when cigarettes didn't kill you, meat was okay to eat every night, and America promised dreams, not nightmares. Just kidding. But hey, the food at least tasted better, and that's what we're led to believe in Stephen King's 2011 hefty slice of historical fiction, 11/22/63. It's a book us losers have been waiting to cover for over half a decade, and it's a book we're going to spend the holidays with this year, as we're dedicating not one, not 3, but 6 episodes to the time-traveling opus. Fortunately for me, and let's be honest, you too, constant listeners, I'm not alone in this journey. For this series, I'll be joined by 2 constants and 1 rotating loser as we try to fit in all the voices of the podcast. And we weren't lying when we said this was a club favorite over the years. So let's hear from the constants. Coming in from Nashville, and hopefully, and I'm saying hopefully, bringing some of that hot chicken for the pantry in Al's Diner. Jen, say hello and tell us the first time you met Jake Epping.
Hey, this is Jen, Marty McFly's girlfriend, Adams, because her name is Jennifer. I
That's
believe.
true. Yeah, Jennifer. Yeah.
It's one of the famous Jennifers that
In the beginning
we claim as ours. Yeah.
In the beginning of Back to the Future, the dad drives up, honks twice, and goes, Jennifer!
Yeah. and then Back to the Future 2, she's Elizabeth Shue, who is, my queen. So the first time I met Jake Epping, I got this book probably for Christmas or like right after it came out, but I didn't read it for a long time. I think I was intimidated because it was so long, and I was like, this is going to be history. This is going to be boring. And so I didn't read it until my first maternity leave. And, I just found myself with a lot of time on my hands. I'm not sure why I chose this really stressful time in my life to read this, but I just picked it up and just was immediately sucked in and just loved it so much, and was finding myself holding it in my hand while I was nursing my daughter. And so I have a lot of sweet memories from reading this too for the first time. But yeah, absolutely loved it. And I remember, I think I bought it for a lot of people for the next Christmas because I was like, y'all will love this book. Even my friends that don't love Stephen King,
Yeah, a similar story for sure. Let's see if it's a similar story for our next loser. Coming down the street, waving a yellow card and warning us to stay away from the beam. Flieger, tell us your first dance with Sadie Dunhill.
Hi, this is Dan. Ich bin ein Flieger. Ich bin ein Flieger. I should say it better.
Ich bin ein Flieger.
Ich bin ein Flieger.
Yeah.
So my first dance with Sadie was pretty much a month after it came out. My mom is a big Stephen King fan, but she would take years off. But for some reason, this and Under the Dome, she got right away. So I had the old copy, which I wish was here with me in Chicago. But yeah, pretty much a month after it came out, I got to read this book, and I really enjoyed it. It's spoiler, one of my favorites of all time of his.
Yeah. Well, because I remember I believe we read it together, or at least around the same time.
We communicated. Even seemed possible 2000. Yeah, I guess it would be. Yeah, we probably did read it together
because it was the fall of 2011 that came out. So
yes.
But for today's episode, we have by far the most familiar face on this podcast. Hardly a rotating loser. But for this series right now, he's got some extra homework, extracurricular homework. Let's just say he's a time traveler himself. And like Jake Epping, he's hitting that Plymouth Fury and taking you to other roads. But today he's here with us, and he's holding his sixth string. He's singing a tune about the single bullet theory. Rockin' Randall, say hello. Tell us about your first time in Dallas, 1963. And also, give us a little tease about everything you've got planned for us in the weeks ahead.
Hey, it's Rockin' Randall Harvey Oswald, and I first read this right after it came out. I've talked about this in the pod before, but like Under the Dome and 11/22 were sort of my forays back into King after maybe 7 or 8 years of not reading any King, and they're like two of my favorites. And, you know, in terms of Latter-day King, especially, I think they're just really, like, both of them are great in their own ways. Under the Dome kind of evokes more cocaine-addled King, you know, very violent, very ridiculous, very funny. 11/22 is a more elegant King, you know, in its way. It's a very romanticized King and probably one of my favorite love stories that he's written. So I was a big fan of this book. I remember specifically coming home from work and being on the bus and reading, you know, I was near the climax of the book, near the end. And I got off the bus and I had to walk like 3 blocks to my place. And I just sat on a bench and just kept reading because I didn't want to stop. Yeah. And that is such a rare thing and such a special thing when you're reading, that genuine feeling that you don't want to put it down and you will just like read anywhere. You will just go sit down at a bench and read. I'm so rarely driven to do that. And so I have very fond memories of it for that reason. In terms of, this is the only book episode I'll be on because I did a couple supplementary interviews that we're going to be dropping over the next couple months that basically, you know, I'll put it very simply. King is very aggressive in the afterword about how he believes that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone shooter and how he has no patience for, you know, tinfoil hat conspiracy theories. As somebody who is obsessed with a lot of those conspiracy theories and finds a lot of validity in them, that doesn't impact my enjoyment of the novel. But because King is so aggressive and so pointed when it comes to what he used as research, I honestly felt like I wanted another opinion. And I'm pretty dialed into these worlds. And so I reached out to a couple people who I think can provide a very smart, educated response to King's sourcing and his belief systems when it comes to this specifically. And also just like what this book says about his larger political evolution as a writer. These are questions that I think are interesting, but ones that we didn't want to weigh down like discussions of the actual book, which is why I thought it would be helpful to do these like supplementary interviews. So we're not just like, you know, we're not getting distracted from the story itself by being like, where's Jack Ruby? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it's, those episodes are going to be coming out shortly. They are with Brendan James, who is one of the co-hosts of the Blowback podcast, which I highly recommend. Very, very smart. Very, very, educated and clever when it comes to the American empire and the ways in which American capital and politics has asserted its force across the world. And the second season of Blowback was all about Cuba, so there was a lot of discussion of Kennedy in that season. But anyways, the fourth season just came out recently, and it's all about Afghanistan and America's role in the wars there, but then also, you know, post 9/11 and our withdrawal. It's really, really good stuff. Anyways, and then our other interview is with James DiEugenio, who is one of the foremost, I think, experts and authors when it comes to the assassinations of the 1960s, RFK, JFK, nice. Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King Jr. His stuff is extremely well respected. He runs a site called Kennedys and King that is basically a one-stop shop for Kennedy assassination scholarship from multiple authors. And he also, his book was the basis for Oliver Stone's recent documentary, Destiny Betrayed, which came out on Showtime relatively, like, I believe 2 years ago. It's really, really good. There's a 2-hour version and a 4-hour version, and his writings really helped contribute to that documentary. So we also spoke with him, and he, I think the interviews are interesting because they directly engage with King's sourcing and King's comments, just providing like another perspective, I think, on a lot of that stuff. And I'm sure I'll talk a little bit more about it as we go on today, but that's the tease.
Well, that is a hell of a tease, and something that I'll get a little FOMO of, because one of the hooks for me, this book, was the JFK assassination, because similarly to you, Randall, I grew up just being obsessed over this stuff, and I think it was, I come from a household that really prioritizes history, and both my parents were instructors at one point. And so when I, learned a little bit more, and I think obviously the inclusion of Oliver Stone's JFK as a kid, seeing that at like age 7 blew my mind or whatever. But like, I just was really obsessed with this topic. And also it just came at a great time because, like you, Randall, I was coming back to Stephen King, and this is where I do believe that I don't think the podcast would have happened if, at least on my end, like if this book didn't occur. Because what happened with me is, so I moved to Chicago in 2007, and I just happened to be unloading a lot of books that I had on my bookshelf and all. And I saw Night Shift, and I was like, oh, I want to read this again. I haven't read it in a few years. And so I reread that, and I remember working at DePaul at the time. And one of my favorite places I've ever worked at. It's a wonderful college that I went to college to, and I worked at the College of Education. And who would become my godmother, the greatest voice in mind in academics, Kate Liston, I love her to death. She saw that I was reading Night Shift, and so it became this start of a really like strong relationship. And she would always get me new Stephen Kings. And so what happened was that first was Under the Dome, and I became enamored in that, and I just ate it up. Like what you're talking about, like going to the park and reading 11/22, Randall. I was doing that on the beach with like Under the Dome over Christmas, and I was like recovering from strep throat. And I remember just that was my escape, was just like, all right, I'm going to get away from everyone. I'm just going to go sit on the beach, and I'm going to read this book. And then I became hooked. And then the next year, I believe, because I got Under the Dome like a year later or something. I got it in 2010 when it was a paperback. So the next year, when 11/22 actually was published in a hardcover, she got me that for Christmas right before the holidays again. And I stayed at home. I stayed here in Chicago for the holidays. And it was literally the only thing I wanted to do the entire time. And I recall everyone else, we kind of passed this book around like a hot potato because it was an expensive book, because it's a big fucking book. And I remember like Justin read it. I remember my ex-wife read it. I remember I even got it from my dad, like you were saying, Jen. Like I was giving it as a gift because I thought it really is an accessible book, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But what really spawned my love for King, again, apologies for this long tangent, but there was a purpose here, is that what happens at the end of this book kind of broke me. And around this time, and this involves Flieger, but around this time, I thought that I'd lost the sense of nostalgia, because I had taken, we went to a horror movie marathon around the same time this book came out. And I had just had too many edibles and smoked too much. And I basically had a Larry David moment in the marathon when we were watching Halloween, where my mind was just like, why are you watching these movies again? Why are you always obsessed with the past? You're a fucking loser. Like, why are you doing this? And I just remember like I was out of it. And then this book came out, and it really took me back. And then the love story just shattered me. And I couldn't get over, we're not going to spoil anything because we're going this book by book, but I couldn't, the ending I couldn't get over. And there's certain specifics about the ending that I became obsessed with, to the point of like, I would write articles about it on my alma mater, Consequence of Sound. And then Flieger and I would talk about it nonstop. And I'd be like, no, but then you started saying, well, you need to read The Dark Tower, because this gets into the other worlds, and that the fact that there could be another world where there is a fate that you like in there. And you mentioned that there is a reference to 11/22/63 in the ending of the book 7. So that is why I started the Dark Tower series, is because I'd been putting it off forever, and I wanted to find answers for 11/22/63 in this long running thing. And then from there, we started doing the cinematic universe for the Dark Tower. And then from there, I was so obsessed still that I wanted to read Revival. And then we decided to start this podcast. So sorry for that long-winded story, but for me personally, my invested interest into Stephen King certainly came from just my obsession with this book. And that's why partly I really wanted to extrapolate this into 6 episodes, because this for me is, and again, I haven't read Revival yet, but this is the last book I would probably consider like a top 3, if not number 1. And I thought that was something special. But yeah, Fleer,
can I weigh in too? So we were watching, it was a 24-hour horror movie marathon.
Yeah.
And we watched Hour of the Wolf, which is like Ingmar Bergman movie about like latent homosexuality, and man kills a boy at the beach with like a rock.
Yeah.
That's when we ate the edibles.
Yes.
And then Halloween came up, and me and you were just like, what was that movie?
Yeah.
And we were losing our minds. And I looked over at you, and you were like looking at your shins, like in the movie theater, just looking down. But yeah, so then for Christmas, I got you the Dark Tower, which Caffrey had actually gifted me back in the day. But it was so funny, the intensity of those edibles. And what a shared great, because me and Mike had been friends from back in the day, and then I moved away to go to school. And when I came back, it was like I moved here in like September, and this is October, so we were like reacclimating and just hanging out again. But yeah, it was a intense moment, but a memorable one, obviously.
It was, and it sucks too, because it was one of the best lineups the Music Box ever put together. Like Randall, I think you were there, right? It was like Poltergeist, Pumpkinhead, and Halloween, and I mean, it was just banger after banger. And of course, I fucked it all up because my old bassist Kyle, who's also a huge Stephen King fan, he gave us these cookies or whatever they were, and they're always too much. There's always too much concentration, and the weed is too damn strong. But then on top of that, like Flea lived nearby, so we just always run back and smoke at your place, and then we'd come back, and I was a zombie. At one point, I think Mac looked over during Pumpkinhead, and I was like drool was almost coming out of my, like, I was like out of it. And he's like, dude, what's wrong with you? And I was like, I got to go home. And anyway, it cracked my head a little bit, but this is the story that put me back on the path of the beam.
It all goes back to Stephen King.
It does. It really does. So fun times to look back in the memories, and wouldn't you know it? There's a lot of nostalgia and looking back that we're going to be doing over this series. But for now, we are in Lisbon Falls. It's pleasant. We could sit here all day and chat about our memories, but instead, I think we should hop in our car. Not a Plymouth Fury. You know it. As you mentioned Back to the Future earlier, well, let's just say I got my hands on a DeLorean. So let's get in and let's drive up to Derry, specifically the Derry Public Library.
Mike Hanlon, if you see...
Excuse me, sir. Do you have Prince Albert in a can? You do? Well, you better let the poor guy out.
Yeah, Mike Hanlon, that I had to go, that I had to get cleaned up. Tell him I'll see him tonight.
Get out! Last chance, don't you? Get out! Get out!
All right. Well, in the Derry Public Library, we take out books. We see Pennywise being a little shit and torturing people in the library and making some jokes, making some unfunny jokes sometimes. But we also discuss the history and the background of said book that we're covering. And if you didn't realize from the title of the episode and our 20-minute preamble, we're covering 11/22/63. And this is King's first historical novel. And as he says, and there's a lot of research to go through. So let this be a forewarning to you that the majority of this episode is going to be in the Derry Public Library. So pull up a chair, maybe get some coffee. If it's like anything like the Bangor Public Library we went to last year, there's probably some coffee shops nearby. Enjoy yourself, sit back, because we got a shitload of story to tell. And I hope that, honestly, we all have enough plutonium, because we are going to be doing a lot of time traveling in this segment. So to start, let's grab our dancing shoes and be sure to burn those draft cards, because we're heading back to the early 70s when Nixon was president and the war was raging. We're going to be talking about the origins of 11/22/63, and we have to go back to the early 70s to do that. Now, thanks to our historian, Bryant Burnett, we've had dozens of articles and sources to cite from, and although a few interviews see King stating he had the idea for 11/22/63 in 1971 and 1972, a few others I've read also say 1973, which would make sense given that King he describes that he was teaching school in Maine, and it was the anniversary of the assassination, which, as we know, 11/22/63. What's 10 years later? Okay, it would be 73. So I'm going to say it's 73, but let's just keep it in the world of the early 70s. We'll do that. All right.
It's pretty common. Like Under the Dome was like this too, because that was and same with the Cannibals, which was a precursor to Under the Dome. Those were all things he was reflecting back on because they were early ideas, and his dates always get really fuzzy when he talks about them. And I think it's because I think he probably always had this little nagging notion about because he was in full kind of hippie mode by this point. And and he's always thinking about stories. So I think the idea of going back in time and stopping Kennedy's assassination was probably an idea that people threw around all the time, in the same way that we do about going back and killing Hitler, right? And so I think that's why I think the dates get murky, because it's probably something he had talked about in 71 and 72. He probably didn't calcify it into a story until 73.
Yeah. So I think we'll stick to. I like that. Yeah. Let's say that he had the idea. Let's say that he calcified it 73. Which, again, would make sense, because the story that he says over and over again is that he was in the teacher's lounge and they were all wondering aloud what would happen, or what would the world look like if Kennedy hadn't been killed. Now, according to an interview with Natasha Footman of the Tesco Books blog from Halloween 2011.
Man, I miss the old internet.
I know, I did too.
King would do interviews with Tesco Books blog.
I know, and it's so cute too, because they're like, I cannot believe it. We got this interview, and he did a shitload of press. Probably, I would argue that this is probably the most press he's done.
Yeah.
Since is for 11/22. We're gonna go all into it, but it's pretty wild that the stuff that he's doing on this I just don't remember him doing this with other books later on. But, in this interview, he explained that, upon discussing that what if situation in the teacher's lounge, he then wrote 14 single space pages and dubbed it Split Track. I think 11/22/63 is a better title than Split Track, though.
Right? Like Sliding Doors or something.
Yeah. What if he called it Sliding Doors, and it's just just confuses the hell out of everyone? What? Is Gwyneth in this?
He probably could have made a lot of money on the royalties from Sliding
Convertibles. That'd be such a lame title. I've got this cool time traveling story. It's called Convertibles.
Zip Zap Zapruder.
Zip Zap Zapruder. Yeah. I'm trying to think of some other bad titles. It could be what if JFK didn't die? Just the most blunt title possible I can imagine.
Camelot?
So anyway, he wrote these 14 single space pages, dubbed it sidetrack, Split Track, but then he stopped. And why? Well, he told Footman, the research was daunting for someone who is working full-time at another job. Also, I understood I wasn't ready. The scope was too big for me at the time. I put the book aside and thought someday maybe I'd go back to it. I'm glad that I didn't go forward with it then. In 1973, the wound was still too fresh. Now it's going on half a century since Kennedy was assassinated. I think that's about long enough. And he kind of gives a little bit more of what those pages were while speaking to Tom Perrotta at the John F. Kennedy Library and Museum, which is an incredible interview. I'll try to see if we can share this somewhere on the socials, because it's really good, and there's a video of it too. That's pretty awesome. But he was, it was the research that did hold him back. He's pretty insistent on that. And when we discuss the production of this book, we can see why. But here's what he had in the seeds, and there's a lot of seeds here. So he says, I wrote about 25 pages. I got all this stuff about the diner and how nobody in town would go there. Al Templeton has his specialty, which he calls Al's Famous Fat Burger, and people in Lisbon Falls call it Al's Famous Cat Burger because the price is so low, and there are all these rumors. But what he's doing is he's using his time portal to go back to 1958 and buy ground beef at 58 prices. So again, it's a matter of research. You go and you get the, remember, Tom, there were no computers. There was no Google or anything. You actually had to go to the library and research this stuff. So I want to pause there for a second. First off, I want to do a side question. So Randall, you covered the cannibals for Under the Dome. Would you say that the seeds that he describes in these pages are more in line with what we get with 1122 base versus like the stuff we get in the cannibals with Under the Dome?
You mean like his mindset at that time?
Yeah. Like, do you think there are more concrete details that he took from the actual origins the first time he started writing this than the cannibals?
Yeah, he was a lot more cynical back then. And I mean, when you say like, what does the book look like back then versus what does it look like in 2011, I think it would have been, like he says, the wound is too fresh.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, personally, that's the book I would have preferred.
I know.
Well, maybe not. I mean, I do love the tenderness of this book, but that is something I talked about with Brennan James quite a bit, is like, what does the book look like if you wrote it back when he initially had the idea? And I think it would have looked wildly different. I mean, I think the thing about the cannibals, which is the precursor to Under the Dome, we have an episode about it in our Patreon. It's really interesting, but it's such a deeply, deeply cynical story as it's written in the early, that was actually like mid to 70s to early 80s. Like,
I think he started it around Creepshow around that time.
He poked around it for a long time before he did it. But a lot of what you're saying about research is very true to Under the Dome as well, because, and it's funny that he did these two old projects kind of back to back in a way.
We have a little bit more of that too.
Resurfaced. Yeah, because
hold on to that note.
Oh, I'll hold on to it. I'll leave it there.
But like I agree, because I think there is that's the disparity I really wanted to discuss, because the two of us especially have really always talked about that mean king, and like you do kind of get glimpses of it. So like on page 56 of 1122, I thought this was kind of like a good glimpse into what this original story could say. So like Jake says, then I thought of the federal government discovering they could send special ops into the past to change whatever they wanted. I didn't know if that were possible, but if so, the folks who gave us fun stuff like bioweapons and computer-guided smart bombs were the last folks I'd want carrying their various agendas into living unarmored history. And I feel like that's more in line with like the king we knew from like The Stand, like that mistrust of the government, which... Yep. I think in later books, it's especially when he gets into the crime procedurals, there's a little bit more of a trust in
institutions.
Yeah. But you talked about seeing how this book in 70s versus now, like, do you think that this would still be a love story in the early 70s?
I'm not sure. I mean, he was still writing. He was still interested in love stories back then. I mean, Salem's Lot and The Shining are both kind of built around doomed love stories. So I think I think it still would have been there, but I doubt it would have been as pronounced as it is in this version.
What do you think, Jen? Oh, Flieger, go for it.
Sorry. No, Jen, please, you go.
I think, yes, I think it would maybe still be a love story, but maybe more along the lines of The Dead Zone. I don't think Sadie would be nearly as big a part of the story. I don't think Jody would either, because I think for me, and this is just coming from my own frame of reference, I think when I think of 73 King, that's a king who is still drinking and using a lot too. And I think that is where a lot of his meanness and cynicism comes from. It's just that just introduces pain in your life. And what I think... when I think about this book, like the heart of it, I think is really about regret and like what can we change and what should we change? And that is something that you learn with recovery, is that you can't go back and change the past, and you kind of just have to learn to accept it. And I don't think that a younger king would have been writing from that frame of reference. And I wonder, like, because he's talking about having the idea for the beginning of the book, but I wonder what his idea for the end of the book was, or if he had thought about the ending at that point. Odds are he didn't, because we know he kind of uncovers the story as he goes. But I wonder if the ending of this book, like aside from the Sadie stuff, I wonder if it would have turned out the same, because I just think that this is a book that I can tell is written by a man with a lot of years under his belt and a lot of experience and a lot of life experience. So I don't know. It might have still been a love story, but I don't know if it would have been as much of a love story of finding the place where you belong, which is what I really love so much about this book, you know?
Yeah, I think there is. I have a theory. So, but share your thoughts.
Well, I honestly think it's after the assassination, right? There's an innocence that was lost in America after that moment, the same way that for maybe our generation, 9/11 killed off some innocence. So I don't think the love story would have, it leans a little 1950s, but also that coming of age of the late 60s, right? If this was coming out 73, I just think that cynicism would have been a little bit more pronounced. So I don't think the love story would have worked as well, but maybe now having the distance of, decades after, for him to revisit the story and sort of, there's almost like a yearning, whether it's, and I'm not spoilers, but there's a scene of like a high school dance that seems very innocent and quaint now to us that I don't think would have been captured the same way had this been written in 73.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have this weird sort of, so I was thinking like in terms of the ending, I'm glad you brought that up because we know that King is a sponge with pop culture. And so I've lately been on a Clint Eastwood kick, big Clint Eastwood kick.
Really?
I'm devouring, I've watched like 4 movies of his a day now at this point, but like
okay.
I really love his works. And so I was watching Escape from Alcatraz the other night, and that's a 1979 movie. And I know that he had claimed to write, this Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption in like from 76 to 77, or maybe even 75 to 76, or before the movie came out, but it came out in different seasons in 82. So it's like, I did wonder like the similarities between, and granted, Escape from Alcatraz is based on a true story, but you watch that movie and not only do you see like how Darabont pulled from it, but even just the story itself, like you could see how it might have influenced King in certain ways. So using that stupid fucking inference on my part, or I thought the ending of 11/22/63 could be in the early 70s could be like Dirty Harry, and he just like Jake just goes up to Oswald and just blows his brains out. It's like, and it's just brutal, and everyone just like cheers him on at the end, and it's like it's as like wild and brazen as the ending of like Running Man or something like that, where it's just like it's just brutal. It's just like gratuitously brutal. But who knows? We'll never know. Do
you feel lucky, Patsy?
Yeah, it's exactly like Jake is just like this. He's like because I feel like a lot of his characters around the 70s and the early 80s too were like brawny men too sometimes, like especially in his Bachman stuff. So I do wonder like if Jake would have been like this really not beefy guy,
a
but
little
like
less sensitive.
Yes, exactly.
You're like stepping on his intestines as he like goes through the book depository. Yeah, well, and there's also that theory, and this probably is something we're going to talk about at some point, but that that Joe Hill contributed to the ending, and Joe Hill was not.
Yes.
It was a kid, or maybe not even born. I'm not sure when he was born. But I also think like if Jake would go back from 1973 to 1958, like that is just not, there's no contrast there. I mean, there is, but it's not nearly as pronounced as it is now. And I think that the Sadie, I don't know if she would have been able to figure it out because the world has just changed so much, But I also love this idea of like, he just wasn't ready to take on this. It's like, this is a great idea, but it's not ready to be uncovered yet, as we know how he's kind of uncovers his story.
Well, he's got a quote on that. And he on the point of it all being too fresh, he aligns with this, and when discussing the past, he states, I'm 64 years old now. I believe this is the Footman interview. I'm 64 years old now. On the date when Jake is dumped into the past, September 9th, 1958, I would have been just shy of my 11th birthday. There's such a tendency to look back on those times through rose-colored lenses. I felt that I had to go back and look at the past as realistically as possible. And that makes me wonder also like that relationship to the past. I think a 2011 King, 2010 King, when he's writing this, he certainly has more of a grip on just that the dangers of having those rose tinted lenses in a way.
But there's so much rose tinting in this.
There is, but there's definitely like, I do appreciate the fact that he does try to like slip in some like things that weren't great you know, things aren't good here and there. Like he talks about the, you know, the past smelling and things being too sweet and shit like that. But certainly
he's
he
like,
goes into
everything
more.
tastes so much better.
Yeah.
Like I agree with you in that he does slip in like, oh, right, everyone's racist, you know?
Yeah.
Which is, you know, thank you for that. But it's like there's something that's so nostalgia fueled. Like when you talk about Flieger, when you talked about that school dance, like that's so filtered through 40 years or 50 years of nostalgia, you know? And I think he writes the 50s so well and so compellingly, which is one of my favorite parts of the book, is just allowing this character. Like my favorite parts of this book are him just like dawdling around the 50s, right? Like just driving through the country and just taking it in. And it's like King doing this. Man, I really miss a lot of this shit. And the root beer tasted better. It's real boomer shit, you know, but it's stuff I do too. It's stuff I do too about the 90s, you know?
Yeah, same.
And so it's like, oh man, I miss going to fucking record stores and looking at CDs, you know? It's like
Blockbuster nostalgia.
yeah, Blockbuster nostalgia. Like, I mean, that's the sad thing about us is all of our fucking nostalgia is rooted in like consumerism.
media.
But
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
but it's like, but I find that very charming, but there is also so much rose tinting. So I laugh a little bit when he says it has to be as realistic as possible, because I do think there is a lot of realism there. And I think it's written incredibly well, but you can also see the moments where he's like, man, things were just better then.
Yeah.
you know?
It's also coming off like, the largest conflict in human history, World War II. I think 5 attacks on American soil during World War II. So you have Africa, Europe, Asia in shambles. The American economy is booming. Right. So
but he was 11 years old during that
I know,
time.
but I'm saying the decade
yeah.
that followed, though, is it was, you could work a job and get 2 cars, a house.
yeah,
It was just like
absolutely.
the American dollar was so valuable. But it was a time of like they didn't realize that, there were a lot of problems that were not being addressed, because I think there was almost a sense of relief. The same way that the Soviet Union collapsed for the 90s, it was like, oh, we can kind of just exhale and just kind of enjoy it for what it is. So I think the 1950s is very much like that. But I also think when you look back on it, right, you see the highlight reel of the 1950s. You don't see all the stuff that was going on underneath the surface. So I can see how someone who was 11 around the time of, the Kennedy assassination might look back and think, oh, yeah, this was a great time period. I just always go back to that school dance. It just, to me, like, it feels so idealized, and it's great. Who wouldn't want to go to that dance? Yeah.
But it's also, I just wouldn't call it realistic, but I do love the dream of it. You know what I mean?
I think there's the argument for both, because I think the idea that you would have so much more cultural context, as you were just describing, Flieger, is certainly an advantage, because there is that, and he talks about this in the book a little bit, like the idea that, going back there's the notion that, there isn't going to be a nuclear annihilation when the 13 days situation of the Cuban Missile Crisis happens. I think having that context of just kind of knowing like the how good we did have it versus how bad it would later become. I think there is like that, how, the morality of it all aside, it was better in the sense of what the economy could do for some certain people. And I could see where someone could make the argument of like, oh yeah, things were at least simpler, back then. Cause I still do get nostalgic, even just like a pre-internet age for like you're saying with the 90s, Randall, where it's just like people actually just discuss things and things had more mystery. And I do really miss that. But yeah, so I do think it's like this sort of, there's pros and cons, and I think that to him writing it in 2011 versus the 70s, but I do wonder in the 70s if there would have just been any nostalgia. Like I think it just would have been a blunt, hey, I'm back in the 60s.
Well, yeah, because he didn't have nostalgia cultivates over decades.
It does,
Yeah. It's usually about 2 or 3 decades, I think, which is. I was expecting the 90s to come back, and now I'm living the dream,
I'm just imagining.
Like, it is funny to see, like, early 2000s nostalgia, though.
Oh, God.
I know.
That's a whole
not
yet.
That's
a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it's so fucking funny because, like, especially when you read 1122 and the stuff that he misses from the 50s versus the stuff we miss from the early 2000s.
Yeah.
I know. Well, and that's another thing too, is that like I feel like part of it was better or worse back then. It's just we weren't as connected back then, and so all of these things were happening in different parts of the world, and we didn't see it on social media or the news constantly. And so I feel like it was easier to kind of disappear into your own little Jody bubble and pretend that everything else was fine. And maybe, you would know about the bigger conflicts, but that also only happened at 6:00 when the news came on, and then you could turn it off. And I feel like we were still kind of there in the 70s. Like we did know more, but not the way we do now.
That is the king dream, is just being able to disappear into a small town. I mean,
it really is. Yeah. Part of why I love reading King, Yeah.
I mean, that's part of it extends to like the Institute from a couple of years ago. Like that there's something almost old fashioned in that book where a guy sort of wanders into a town, trying to reinvent himself, gets a job as like a deputy and gets a girlfriend and lives a nice quiet existence. I mean, those are things that you can't really do anymore because we're too connected. There's too much integration. There's too much monopolization. Like there was a looser quality to the world back then.
And there's a pros and cons to that too.
Absolutely.
It's like my boy Joey Pants quote from The Matrix. Ignorance is bliss. And I think there is a sense of that.
Ignorance is bliss is something that everyone says. That's not a fucking
no,
Joey
I know.
I always said of The Matrix.
but I always reference it because then you get the little harp and everything. And also, hey, come on,
Joey
Joey
Pants is awesome.
Love him.
As Neo quoted, "Whoa."
Do you think Keanu Reeves would be a good Jake? Well, we'll save that for We'll save it. We'll save it.
No, but
yeah,
I would watch it.
I just watched the miniseries again recently in preparation, so that actually kind of would be interesting to see.
Well, get ready to talk about the miniseries again in January because we can't even fit it into this year because we decided to spend so much time on this. But King is pretty. King is pretty strict, or at least forthcoming about that nostalgia. He says in that Footman interview, the more I work, the more time that I spent in the past, the more things that I remember, and that was a pleasure. It was nice. Vacation in the way things used to be. But I love the present too. So it was a great vacation. What is it they say? It was a great place, but I wouldn't want to live there. Which, fair. I mean, I think, having said that, if a DeLorean or there was my fucking Julius Meinl or whatever had a secret doorway that went back to the 1972, I'm taking the doorway. But
Julius Meinl.
Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. So like many projects, this ended up gathering dust in King's memory warehouse. But to quote my other man, Dom Cobb, an idea is like a virus, resilient, highly contagious. The smallest seed of an idea can grow. It can grow to define or destroy you. Anyone know what that's from?
Is this
you said
from
Dom
Fast
Cobb.
and the Furious?
Yeah.
No, it's Inception.
Inception. Good. He knows.
I will say I'll give you that quote because that's a longer quote. It's more highly specific.
It is highly specific.
It's like, that doesn't sound like the Fast and the Furious.
That would be a really funny quote coming out of Vin Diesel's mouth, though.
Yeah,
I know.
To paraphrase my not man from another movie that we referenced earlier, Back to the Future 2, Randall, good for you. You know your history. That's what Biff Tannen says to Marty McFly. Anyway,
I almost introduced myself as Biff because Jen did
because I did
a Back to the Future ref. So
well, we should do some more Back to the Future references throughout this 6-part series.
I'd love that.
Maybe we get. Actually, I got something later on that we can do this for. So anyway, this seed for King grew and grew, and I don't think we're spoiling anything by saying the following novel has since defined him in many ways, like what Dom Cobb says. But first, we got to go back in the DeLorean. We got to hit 88 miles per hour and bounce up to the year 2007. An interesting year, my first year in Chicago. But it was around this time. So he breaks word about this project. So in January 2007, King first publicly spoke about the idea of 1122 in a Marvel Spotlight magazine that month, tied to his then new comics, Tied to the Dark Tower. The piece he wrote was titled An Open Letter from Stephen King. And it's not even an idea for a novel anymore, but a comic, as he meditates on other possible original ideas for the medium. Flieger, tell us what he wrote. Why don't you read this section right here?
Quote the King. I'd like to tell a time travel story where the guy finds a diner that connects to 1958. You always go back to the same day. So one day he goes back and just stays. He leaves his 2007 life behind. His goal? To get up to November 22nd, 1963 and stop Lee Harvey Oswald. He does, and he's convinced he just fixed the world. But when he goes back to '07, the world's a nuclear slag heap. Not good to fool with Father Time. So then he has to go back again and stop himself. Only he's taken a fatal dose of radiation, so it's a race against time.
So
I've never seen that quote. That's really interesting.
Yeah,
that's a much more genre like friendly idea.
Yeah,
it's a lot more like a race against the clock feel.
Yeah,
and it also does have the Back to the Future 2 part of going back and seeing, yourself participate in events in the past, which is a little weird.
He loves radiation poisoning too.
Yeah. I mean, who doesn't?
Who doesn't?
It's like Jen certainly does.
I sure do. Yeah, Miss Chernobyl over here.
That's your comfort watches. Is just
really
seeing
is.
the humans melt.
Twice this November.
God, would you go back in time and stop Chernobyl, Jen?
Oh gosh, I would lose all the content. Yes, absolutely, I would go back and stop Chernobyl.
Yeah.
Although the through line of that, and maybe of this, is like if you stop that Chernobyl, is it going to happen again with another thing? Because there's a fatal flaw. Not to spoil the show, but can you ever really stop anything?
I know, and that's something that we're going to be discussing all 6 episodes for sure. But do we want to see this? Would we have wanted to see this book over what we got? Do you think it kind of seems? It feels more like a Bachman book, to be honest.
It does feel more like a
that's
Bachman
a good way
book.
of putting it.
Yeah, and no, because I think then I'd lose what it is that I really love about this book.
I'm definitely intrigued by it, but I do think it's probably like what we got is probably better.
Yeah, I would read both, but I wouldn't trade one for the other.
It comes across more as a short story to me. The race against time, radiation, like the pace of just like 100-page book tearing through it.
Maybe it could have appeared in like if it was '07, I guess it probably would have appeared in like just after sunset at that point, maybe maybe even Full Dark No Stars, which would be the most bizarre fucking entry for that collection. Just like, oh, here's a novella about going back in time to kill JFK with time travel, and everything else is like so grounded in that collection. Anyway, one of the things that we do love about this book is the drama, and we've talked a lot about the dramatic side of King over the years. I don't even think it's a hot take anymore, but I think that his strongest flex as a writer is when he brings out the tears. And I think by this point, though, which is around 2010, 2011, he had arguably had his strongest works dramatic works specifically behind him. I mean, you're thinking about Different Seasons, Dolores Claiborne, The Green Mile. I mean, the list goes on. I mean, even Lisey's story, even though there are supernatural touches in there's a dramatic side to that for sure. Not to mention even the Dead Zone. So, but here's the thing, like the press behind 11/22/63, he like was really championing the realm of historical fiction as this like new sandbox for him. And there is a lot of energy around his quotes, like not only just with the historical fiction, but there's also some anxiety tied to how people would see him in this new king. So, and it's really intriguing because I didn't realize that this was like kind of like a point of not a point of concern, but maybe like a point of contention, I guess. But in October 2011, King admitted to the Wall Street Journal, "I've never tried to write anything like this before. It was really strange at first, like breaking in a new pair of shoes. This might be a book where we really have a chance to get an audience who's not my ordinary audience. Instead of people who read horror stories, people who read The Help or the people of the book might like this book if they can get the message." I want to pause there for 1 second because in this Wall Street Journal piece I'm referencing, which is aptly titled Stephen King's New Monster, there is a lot of discussion about this rebranding for himself. And it's a sentiment that was reportedly also shared with Scribner. Now, I mentioned us talking about a lot of his strongest dramatic works already. Do you think this anxiety was like a little too late? I mean, like hindsight obviously is 2020 for us, but I really don't recall thinking, oh, a time traveling epic, Stephen King can't write that. I mean, what about you all? Like, did it seem like a swerve to you at the time?
Dude, I think he is way in his head with this shit. He
right?
is like, he's been talking about rebranding, or like having gone through all this history, like over the years. In the early 90s, he was trying to rebrand himself. Yeah. That's why he wrote Gerald's Game and Dolores Claiborne and Rose Madder back to back. He was trying to appeal to women specifically, because I think he was worried that his books were becoming too pigeonholed in the horror genre. And I mean, he worried about that from moment one. And you had a question at some point in this, Mike, about like if King had published this first instead of Carrie, like would he have become a horror writer? And, you know, we talked about that a lot during our Bachman episodes because he almost published Roadwork after Carrie instead of Salem's Lot because he didn't. And his agent was like, stick with horror, you know? It's like he didn't set out to be a horror writer. I think he always had insecurity about being viewed as one when he felt he was a very good dramatic writer, which he is. And so I like bristle at him saying this a bit because I feel like he's still hung up on it. Because even in Bag of Bones, 1997, 98, they were like, well, it was his first book, I believe, with Scribner because he had moved on from his previous publisher. And they were like marketing it like gothic horror. Like it's like, oh, this is literary horror. Like King he's doing literature now, not paperback genre, and which is ridiculous because Bag of Bones is not a very good book, but then, you know, as he went on, like he started writing crime in the mid 2000s and like he was always pushing himself and trying new things. And this quote about like, can Stephen King write a time traveling epic? Stephen King can't write that. Like, that's bizarre.
What The Dark Tower is.
Yeah, that's bizarre. It's like by this point in his career, he has flexed so many different muscles and has done really well at the vast majority of them. He can write anything. Like, well, you know, I mean, that's debatable. I'm just saying broadly. And so I think that this is all in his head, in my opinion.
I agree.
Yeah.
Go for it, Jen.
Yeah, and I think like at this, like I think of Stephen King now as, you know, his own genre. I think he kind of transcends genre because he does write about horrific things, but he also, like a lot of his early stuff, if you were looking at a cold classification, I think is sci-fi over horror too, or sci-fi first, you know. It just has horror elements in it. And we, on another podcast, we were recently talking about him as Protestant horror versus Catholic horror, which I've been thinking about a lot because I was just like obsessed with that. But yeah, I think that somewhere along the line he became Stephen King is a genre in and of itself, and even Sadie Hartman uses Stephen King as a clarifier for genre, but I think this happened well before 11/22/63.
Yeah, and I'll say a Bag of Bones defender. I do really like that book.
I do too.
No, it's okay.
I just love how all the horny moments.
I was gonna say
extremely horny.
Yeah. The Pierce Brosnan. Anyway, but I think I got into King in the 2000s, like early 2000s. But before that, I was into him from the films. So I associate him with like Carrie and like sort of these older films. So to me, he did feel out of time, right? I was a kid in the 90s watching 70s horror movies. So the idea of him like traveling back to a different period, it never seemed like a big stretch to me. So even this like rebrand, it's like he's rebranding to what I sort of already associate him with. You know what I mean? Like, and it's every writer and every artist is going to change over time. But even when I think even phrasing it as a rebrand almost feels too much like the publisher, the marketing team, right? It kind of takes away from like the actual writing that was going on at the time.
I was going to say, I think that's a smart way to put it, especially the books he cites, like The Help. I think he's listening to a lot of marketing people at the publishers,
Scribner,
and they're the ones who are saying, we want to tap into this quadrant, you know? And I understand that, but it's like that quadrant could have been accessed with many previous King books, but maybe they're being more pronounced in the marketing in that way. I think I mean, that's kind of poisonous PR, bullshit that I think can really convolute and confuse, a writer's sense of their own appeal.
Yeah. I just think about like the last event series we did to this magnitude was It. And a large chunk of that discussion, which was basically this episode for It, when we go into the history of it all, he's bemoaning the fact that he's just like, he's very self-deprecating. We talked a lot about how he likens himself to like McDonald's, like a hamburger and french fries, McDonald's and stuff. And I get that at that time, because he's coming off this like cocaine crazy 80s where he is the Mr. Ghoul, the master of horror. Like he's certainly a personality to that effect. And I could understand that he would want to stress more. Like, because still in the 80s, we still don't even see, at that point, when Stand By Me pops up and it says based on the story of Stephen King, people are still like, what? Like, and I think by this point, that is all but gone. Like, you have Shawshank Redemption, which was nominated for an Oscar. And then you also have The Green Mile, which was a blockbuster and became, nominated for Oscars too. Hearts in Atlantis, because you have the drama there. I stress the adaptations because I think that's the general, that's the ubiquitous, like, point of view on Stephen King. It's sad to say, but it is. Like, that's people are going to know the movies. I mean, most of our origin stories with King start with the movies, so it's
it's a common denominator. Yeah.
It's a common denominator. So I think that was a big part of it too. Is just like, well, no, we've already seen that, like, his prose has given us at least 3 of the best dramas of the last 30, 40 years. There's no confusion here. I agree with, like, in the sense that it absolutely is just marketing talk. But here's the thing, and we'll talk about this a little bit more. King was instrumental in coming up with a marketing campaign. So I do think it still did come from his anxieties of, like, can I do this? Mm-hmm. Which may be there's a lot of discussion here, but, like, I think he's a man of what ifs, right? Mm-hmm. And that's something that we'll also talk about in a second. But I think he always has had that what if of just like, well, what if I didn't get hit by the car? What if I didn't write this? Like, what if Tabby didn't pull out Carrie? And, he has that, it's almost like an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge sentiment of, like, am I going to wake up one day and, like, these what ifs are going to actually come to fruition? And I think he's constantly battling himself over the last 40 or 50 years on that question of, like, can I do this? Can I be a part of this group? But again, like, I think that's a good thing, because when I think of some of the best creators, even the best athletes, they're constantly pushing themselves because they never get comfortable on their own professionalism.
And it really lends itself to a time travel book of what if, what if totally. I could go back and change X, Y, Z?
Yeah.
You can totally see that. And it's not just, again, he's the artist, right? He's creating the raw material, but I also think he's been around so many marketing type people that he's almost like, you guys have told me I can't release 2 books at the same time. So I create a the Bachman books. I think he's also interested in just kind of anything that he gets into. Hey, guess what? I'm going to direct a movie. Hey, guess what? I'm going to do, it's the opportunity presents itself. I think he's going to go for it. And I think you're right, Mike, though, the what if quality, especially with this book, it just, like, I think that does linger in his mind, and I think it comes across in the writing.
Well, he talks about that what if stuff in Hearts in Suspension. I mean, honestly, one of my biggest regrets of our interview is not bringing that up, because that's something that I've always just thought about with him, is that, like, why does he have that sort of like that? What is it? The God, what's the term? No, it's the idea. It's like the most writers have it, where it's just like the complex, or it's like you don't feel
imposter syndrome.
The imposter syndrome. Yeah, that's what it is.
Well, I mean, he came from lower class upbringing, went to a state school, and got famous writing genre. It's like the majority of people that he's probably at parties with are like Ivy League rich kids who publish, novels about the human experience. It's like you're gonna feel insecure because class is, when it comes to, I think, most issues, political, social, cultural, class is usually the foremost indicator of comfortability. And I think that he is somebody who probably feels like he had to prove himself a lot more to a lot of different people because of the unique circumstances of his success.
And then what I love about him the most is, and this is not even hyperbole, like, the thing I love about him the most is that there are 2 ways you can go about that, right? You can look, and I've seen this just being in academia myself, is that you can look at it and just get self-deprecating and just wallow into a hole and have this sort of, this vitriol or venom towards that other end. Or you can do the other thing, and it's the mantra of living well is the best revenge. You could go and do it, and you can prove them, and you can fucking set the mark. And I think that's what that. Again, I wouldn't call it anxiety, but I just think that I'll just call it anxiety.
I think it is driven by anxiety.
Yeah, I think that anxiety is what has certainly fueled him since the beginning, and I think that's why he's, the output that he has is to such magnitude. But I bring all that up because it's clear that this was certainly something he wanted to prove something with this book, and I think that the reason why I say that is because of just the amount of sweat equity he poured into the background in this book. Now, Jen, you mentioned earlier that when it comes to most of his writing, he writes as he goes. He creates the story as he goes. And we've discussed that on this podcast. This was different. And, like any historian diving into the past and coming up with the story, King really did his homework. So earlier we talked about how the research held him back in the 70s. And in the same conversation with Perota at the JFK Museum or Library, he explained how the online resources were just an incredible supplement to his research here. Randall, why don't you take this next part? It's a little lengthy, but I think it's really important to kind of show just the lengths that he went to.
I'll say this. He did a lot of research. He was also very choosy and particular about the research he went to. And that's something I talk about a lot with my guests, but we'll save that for those episodes. Okay, here's the quote. I saw Kennedy more as a man as a result of some of the footage that I looked at. That's one of the great benefits of the computer, is that a lot of this archive footage is available. The thing that stuck out in my mind the most was I found video of him in Tampa and Miami. This was just days before the Dallas trip, and he did all the things that the politicians do, the grip and grin kind of thing. And it gave me a chill to see him in that same car with the same open top. He goes into the crowd and the Secret Service agents are just kind of looking at each other like, what do we do now? There were barriers, almost like the ones you see sometimes between lanes when the highway is under construction. And there was a gap. He slips through the gap and he starts to shake hands. The agents are kind of like, oh man, I don't know what to do now. And they're the same agents that were surrounding him days later in Dallas. But the thing that I really liked was that they showed him at a political function that night. And there's a guy in alpine shorts with the suspenders and the lederhosen and the alpine cap, and he's playing Hail to the Chief on the accordion. Kennedy comes in, and this is kind of like a holy shit minute. Like, this guy, I can't believe it. I had to put it in the book because at that second you see Kennedy the man just going like, how bizarre is this world that I'm in, like us doing this right now. So I got a picture of him as a man.
Now, the reason why I put this quote in here is that I genuinely can't recall any moment in his back catalog from this point on where he had to do any kind of research like this for a real life figure. Is this the first time he really had to do that?
In terms of writing, I mean, that's sort of like, I think, a distinctive quality of this book that I'm not sure has the ripple effects to me are more negative than positive, because I think he used to write more obliquely and abstractly about like real world politics in his book. Like The Dead Zone is clearly based on real shit, but he didn't like put specifics, Richard Nixon in there or something like that, right? Like, and then but then Under the Dome is a very clear satire of Bush and Cheney and the right-wing post-Iraq movement of that time. He doesn't, he calls out some stuff explicitly, but not really. It's like he allows those characters to be satirical figures. And he allows them also to be their own characters, that are independent of Bush and Cheney. And this is the first book where he's like, you know what? I'm going to actually write Kennedy. And that's something you see more and more in later books, is he starts like weaving in real world figures a lot more. And I think, to very mixed results. So, yeah, that's what I'll say.
Yeah, Dark Tower has some references to historical figures, but again, it's very surface level. There's reference to Kennedy possibly being a gunslinger, but it doesn't get a lot deeper than that.
He mentions Kennedy in like so many different books, especially leading up, like in this decade leading up to 1122. It was clearly on his mind.
Well, and speaking of that, like we're just covering Full Dark No Stars, and there is a really clear parallel to BTK, which again, kind of like you were saying, Randall, like it's his own character and there are no direct references, but he also got a lot of backlash for that, specifically from family members. And I don't know where this lines up in the writing of that and the timeline. I know it was pretty soon after release, but I wonder if that was in his head too, was like, I got to get it right. If I'm going to write about this exact person, I have to get it right, because they have relatives that are still living. There are people that were there that could dispute me.
It gets dicey too, because you start like projecting your own feelings for that person into the character in ways that I don't think necessarily always serve them. And I have more thoughts on that later.
Like Kennedy as a gunslinger. I don't know if I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a flip side of that coin, because one of the reasons why I think he had to really pull his weight there is because of Oswald. Now, I've held off on including Oswald stuff because we're going to be talking a lot about him in a section coming up. Not a section, an episode coming up. A lot about him. It's going to be almost too much. And he'd agree with me because he said that was some of the rough writing for him was just having to do the Oswald stuff in there. So I do think a lot of that, the research of the trying to humanize them, trying to make them as realistic as possible, came from the fact that there was no way around it to make, to do this without, actually having Oswald be a real character in this. And I think that's kind of an important distinction to show just his writing process to this. And I think that that's probably one of the biggest hurdles for him when he was starting out, because, as we just discussed, like his process is just stream. Let's just do it. Let me get to the page and I'll find a way to get there. And I imagine there were a lot of pit stops for this. And there were. I mean, the research alone was, through this. And I think based on a lot of the interviews I'm reading, it wasn't so much that he just had all the research and then he went to write. I think he was doing research while he was also still writing too, which I imagine also is kind of new for him at the time.
Well, you start writing and then you realize what you don't know and you have to go back and research that.
Yeah.
The problem, though, and this is something that has really plagued, I think, Latter-day King, is that his research pops up inorganically at times in his work. I was rereading some of the Al sections where he's basically laying out the Oswald stuff for Jake in the first 100 pages of this book. And some of it reads like extremely clunky because he's just reiterating research materials that he used. And I mean, we just talked about Holly, and there's parts in that book where it just feels like he's reading a CDC press release, you know what I mean? And that shit it very much pulls me out, which is something that I noticed, I think, more acutely on this reread of 1122.
There's a little bit of that in the end of Big Driver too, where he
we talked about that.
Yeah.
But he also leaned on good old school research,
cracking the books.
Yeah. So the stuff that he would had have done in the 70s, both he and his longtime researcher Russ Dorr, who has since passed away, went on a healthy diet of historical documents, newspapers, books, clothing and appliance ads, sports scores, and television listings. They even went the extra mile and hit up Dallas for a week to see Oswald's apartment building on West Neely Street. They even paid a resident $20 to go inside. Makes me think like the two of them were like in the episode of like The Wire. It's like walking around. Fuck.
You think he could have given him a little more than $20?
I think so too. Yeah. I mean, come on.
Hey, this was 2007 money. Okay,
yeah.
$20 went a lot more.
I guess that's true. What if they said, "Hey, I need to see this house. This was where Lee Harvey Oswald lived," and the guy's like, no, and it becomes this long story for him, and they're actually there for days. And like, oh, how do we get this guy? And then eventually, like, they shoot him, and
that's what I imagine is like this Nathan Fielder show y'all keep telling me about. It's something very similar to that.
Honestly, that is a very similar subplot to what would happen in that show. But anyway, so they visit that. They visit the home of General Edwin Walker, one of Oswald's failed assassination targets. Spoiler alert for the book history. They also went to the 6th floor museum, which is the site of the former Texas School Book Depository. They had a private tour there.
I will add, we talk a lot about the Texas School Book Depository, the 6th floor museum, in my interview with James D. Eugenio. He has a lot of thoughts about the curator there and King's reliance on him and what that museum represents specifically to people in Dallas.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Is it like more negative than?
Hey, you have to listen to the episode. Well, I'll just say this: that Jim does not see that as the best source of information.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tourist attraction, so I can only imagine
that's
they're like
part of it. And
it's weird that these things are tourist attractions. Like when I was in LA, they had this like Titanic thing. And you like go through. Granted, they didn't even really have much Titanic items there. There's mostly just stuff from the other White Star lines but they were similar objects, so they had it. But when we got out, there's like a gift store, and they like had like things like you get a coffee mug that has like a life preserver on it. I'm like, Jesus Christ, this is so fucking morbid.
In Memphis, the hotel room where Dr. King was when he shot is now a museum. And I remember we went there in 6th grade, and there was a couch and a lady who just constantly protests there. And she'd been doing that for years.
Wow.
Yeah,
Oh, God.
I in Vienna, I went to a church that was built out of skulls and bones, and I was taking pictures, and this lady like accosted me and was like, "How dare you disrespect this? But would you like a postcard?"
Oh.
It's such
That's
a
pretty
sick.
badass.
Did you buy the postcard? This is a
No,
postcard
I
also
did take
made
more
out of
pictures
skulls and
because I was like,
bones?
"Don't tell me what to do."
Yeah. Were you like when you said
I'll add your skull to that, Bill.
Right.
Oh God.
it's like quiet you? So he used all these these details, and he also had dinner with Doris Kearns Goodwin, who was an assistant to President Lyndon Johnson and the author of the Abraham Lincoln book, Team of Rivals, and her husband, Dick Goodwin, who was also part of the Kennedy team. And they chatted about alternate histories, particularly worst case scenarios that could unfold if, Jake did wind up changing history. And those points were also used in the novel. I did like this tidbit, though, from his interview with Errol Morris of the New York Times. Jen, why don't you give this one a read?
Okay. I asked them to sort of spitball about things that might have happened if Kennedy had lived. And one of the things they pointed out, it's a weakness with Obama too. Kennedy was inexperienced enough to have a real difficult time dealing with the Senate and the House of Representatives. Johnson was much better at it. He was able to push a lot of stuff through. He was very canny about it. Johnson said, well, we ought to do this, this, and this to help memorialize our dead Jack Kennedy. And so we got the civil rights thing and a bunch of other stuff as well, including Medicare, I think.
And not surprisingly, a lot of those what ifs stem from his own what ifs, particularly his 1999 accident, which makes sense given that we've discussed at great lengths in this podcast, including the episode we're recording right now, because we just talked about it literally 15 minutes ago, about how the what ifs have always swum in his brain. There's another part of this Morris interview that I think is telling on this aspect. Jen, take this one too.
I also want to say every time you say "what if," my brain starts playing the Creed song.
Oh
so,
yeah, classic. Is that in Scream?
Scream 3?
Oh yeah,
yes it is.
God, that's personally my favorite soundtrack for my money's worth. But
it's a good one. Halloween's Dominion again. Okay, it was Doris who said, I thought of this, but it just seemed so wild. Wallace might really have gotten elected in 1968. It's fascinating, though, isn't it? That 1 minute, less than a minute, in Dallas and everything's up for grabs. I believe in those watershed moments. In 1999, I got hit by a van and almost killed. I was out taking a walk in the afternoon. I've thought back on that many times, and I'm thinking if I'd left a minute earlier, if I'd left a minute later, if I'd stayed another 15 minutes at lunch, if somebody had dropped by, if, but those things didn't happen. So I happened to be at that one particular place at that one particular time, and something happened that changed my life. Today, it probably doesn't matter if we talk until 10 minutes of 1 or 10 minutes past 1. Things are going to go pretty much as planned. Most days they do, but not always. And that's interesting because I think a king in 1973, I don't know if he's thinking that much with that much detail about the what if, because I think in that age, especially with somebody who's still drinking, you're really just kind of trying to get through the day, and you haven't lived long enough to see the results of the what if going one way versus the other. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And I think so much of what if stem from those gasps of happiness, you know? Or
yeah. What if this never happened? Or what if what if somebody takes it away, you know?
Exactly. And I think that when you're starting off early on, and if this is going to be your first book, especially, you're not going to have that sort of, that specificity towards even that relationship towards that what if at all, really.
You also might not have the clout to indulge in it as much as he does in this book, because I know that's why he, released the cut version of The Stand, because as a new writer, you just can't give us an 800, however many pages this are. You know?
That's true. Yeah. I mean, I just imagine like, all right, here's my first novel. They're like, Stephen King, who the hell is this guy? And it's like this 800-page opus.
Missioner.
Yeah. Jesus Christ. Can you give us something smaller? And he's like, well, I got this story about a school girl.
It's about a period.
Yeah. And that's his sophomore. So he also, in terms of what ifs, he did indulge in, some of the conspiracy theories that have piled up in the wake of Kennedy's assassination. And as we've talked already, he basically said that Oswald acted alone. And that's something that, as we've already teased, Randall's going to be talking a lot about in the accompanying episodes coming up. But real quick, though, like, do we think this was a smart decision, at least narratively? Like, I know we don't. I mean, I can't speak for everyone on this podcast, with the exception of maybe Randall, because I think we've talked about so much about it. But like, I don't think it was Oswald. I think it is an oversimplification of things. Having said that, I do understand why he did it for the novel. Like, I get that, because I think you need that through line to make it simple. But what are your all thoughts?
I mean, I will happily talk, but I want to make space for Dan and Jen to jump in.
Well, Fligger, you do believe in the conspiracies too.
I'm big in the mafia connections, especially being from like the Tampa area, and there's this mobster Trafficante who's like in Donnie Brasco is featured kind of briefly. They make it look like Miami, but it really takes place kind of near my hometown. Even Goodfellas, when they go to the Tampa Zoo, it's Lowry Park Zoo. I think I'm a firm believer in the Patsy theory, that there were a lot more people involved here and that he kind of was the fall guy. I was just listening to the True Anon pod. They were doing an update on the Kennedy assassination the other night. I know Randall, we've discussed this too. And maybe the oversimplification, I don't know. I go back and forth, because now I'm doing the what if, but like, what if this was a little more fleshed out? But I actually think this book is more about Jake and Sadie than the actual assassination. And I'm actually kind of happy for that, because it's one of the great love stories that King has written. So I don't mind it. If I want to just get academic, and, it's not Errol Morris documentary here. It's a fictional novel that, focuses more on the emotions than just the actual facts of what happened. I don't mind the oversimplification, but I do the way that we got a, extended version of The Stand. I wouldn't mind seeing an extended version of this book as well, with some of the other research that maybe, or some of the pathways that were explored that maybe didn't make the final cut.
Yeah. Let me just say, like, I think narratively it is smart to streamline the story. Justin put it really well. He's like, well, the Kennedy stuff is like the fourth or fifth most important thing in the book. And I think that's the best way to look at it. Like, it doesn't bother me as somebody who finds the lone shooter theory absurd on its face. Like, it doesn't bother me to have that story told, because, I think it exists within an alternate reality anyways. I mean, that's the thing about King's works, is that they do exist there, and I'm more than happy to go with him on that journey. The thing that there's just this weird, like, the afterword left such a bad taste in my mouth, because he's so, and this is something that has really emerged in the last, I think, like, starting with this book kind of, and through his later books, is there is just this this sort of incurious, heavy-handed rejection of alternative theories when it comes to a lot of, I think, Flashpoint issues. And it drives me a little crazy, because I don't need, like, King to indulge every conspiracy theory, but he can't just say, I go with, I believe the lone shooter theory based on what I've read. He has to say things like, I don't see how anybody, like, in the afterword, he says, I don't see how, like, anybody, any reasonable person could come to the conclusion that it was, wasn't just Lee Harvey Oswald with a gun. It's ridiculous. And like, I love him, and I say this with love, but it is like, he does that. And then he also talks about, like, tinfoil hat conspiracy theories. He uses that phrase in, and then when you read, 1122, Al, who is very much clearly the voice of the research portion of King, says things like, oh, these theories have all been disproven, which is ridiculously false. Yeah. And but the thing is, like, it's like how I think, like, when King was doing his research, there's always been such a huge wealth of research on Kennedy that in those early internet days, it evokes the way things are now, where it's very easy to find research materials that back up whatever your preferred point is. That's sort of, there's so much shit now that you can neglect some stuff, take in other stuff. And I think what I take issue with is what King, and this is part of the mailer quote that is at the beginning of the book as well. And it relates, is that King sort of does this dance about people who believe in conspiracy theories want easy answers to these things, when actually it was something more chaotic. And the more chaotic thing is one guy with a gun shooting. And I understand that there's a chaos to that. But I'm really confused by that framing, because that is actually a very concise and mostly consequence-free read on it, is that it was one guy who did this. Whereas the conspiracy theories, the credible conspiracy theories around Kennedy, are, the whole point is that it's so complex and so convoluted and involves so many different people from so many different corners of the government, of the mafia, of the business class and the elite class, that there is never going to be a clear answer, especially now. The whole point is that, like, this Kennedy's death came from like hundreds of different strings all coalescing on this one day. And that's why the Kennedy assassination still fascinates people to this day, because it is one of the clearest examples of all the various levers, all the things that operate under the surface, coming together and actually like resulting in this one cataclysmic event when something did emerge from the chaos. So the whole notion of like conspiracy theorists just want easy answers, the people who are serious about Kennedy research, and if you read like Libra or American Tabloid, which are kind of the two fictional books about the Kennedy assassination that actually live within the chaos of conspiracy, those books are all about that confusion, subterfuge, and like mind-bending lunacy is what resulted in him being murdered. You know what I mean?
One of my favorite takes, though, is still from The Rock at the end when Nicolas Cage gets the microfiche and he's like, honey, you want to know who really killed Kennedy? As if him looking at a few frames of the film is like, oh, you solved it.
Yeah.
Mike, what were you going to say?
Well, the thing that I think about also is just, when we talk at great lengths about this, especially if we have a couple of drinks in us, but it's just the changing of the guard on on how society has viewed conspiracy theorists.
Oh yeah.
In a way. And it's kind of crazy because I pinpoint 2 points of the death of American culture. And obviously there's far more nuanced things that happen, but in terms of just the two big ubiquitous moments of we'll never go back, things will never have that sort of, I mean, frankly, yellow journalistic national pride, is the Kennedy assassination, and then also everything that happens in Watergate. I think those two things those are the two bullets of the American dream, and then certainly 9/11 was after that, because at that point the idea to dilute, you get the sense that, okay, well, wait a second, there's a ripple here at the American dream with Kennedy's death. And then Watergate proves that, oh yes, those levers that we all speculated about, no, they're true. These people are scumbags, and they're running they're running shit behind the scenes. And then and there's certainly more events after this. I mean, fuck, the 80s with Reagan and Iran Contra. Actually, that's the third one for me. The Iran Contra affair is the big one where you go, oh, they're just doing this now openly, and they don't care. And
then
that's
they tell
scary.
you.
Yes.
This is such. I'm glad you brought this up, and we're saying all this now so we don't have to say it later, right?
Yeah.
And but it's basically like Iran Contra is a really great example of something that happened before everyone's eyes, and the media and the government told us it wasn't happening.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, what drives a lot of people to conspiracy theories, because we are constantly told that what we see with our own eyes and what we experience in our own lives is not true, and that we should just believe institutions when institutions have been proven to disenfranchise the poor and help the rich. And I'm not trying to be on a soapbox here, but I'll just say, like, the problem with a lot of conspiracy discourse, probably post 2001, post internet, is that a lot of the craziest stuff became a lot more visible, and like stuff did get disproved when it comes to Kennedy. Like, I love JFK, the Oliver Stone movie, but the stuff with Clay Shaw is dicey. And like, that's, you know, I think that wasn't perhaps the best thread for Stone to pull.
And he admits that now. Like,
he does.
Yeah.
But that's the thing is, like, people are very eager to throw the baby out with the bathwater because of the Clay Shaw stuff. People are like, well, Stone's a crank and that movie's bullshit. And that is bullshit. Yeah. It's like, yes, people are going to get shit wrong. But the thing about a lot of conspiracy researchers that I've spoken to is that they're comfortable with getting stuff wrong. You know what I mean? They don't claim to have all the answers. King acts like he says he's 99% sure of this. Like, and he says, like, anyone who doesn't believe this is crazy. He literally says that. And that to me
is the problem.
That's what bothers me. Is like, I literally probably wouldn't even have done these supplemental interviews if he wasn't so aggressive in the afterword. But I mean, like, and then, you know, I mean, and a lot of this stuff is getting proven now. Like, there was a story earlier this year in the New York Times, of all places, about one of the Secret Service agents talking about the quote unquote magic bullet theory. Like, there's been more research, like, since 11/22 has come out to give more credence to the conspiracy. But I mean, there's been this like concentrated, this is where Iran-Contra and other stuff comes in, is like, there's been this concentrated effort among quote unquote disinformation researchers who by and large literally just tell you to believe whatever a Democrat politician says. And like, many people in these circles, they literally flatten the discourse. So everything is QAnon, right? Yeah. So it's like, or like so you can see these charts that disinformation people will pull up, and they'll put Iran-Contra next and JFK next to QAnon. And they'll be like, well, all of these things, you know, and like, so satanic baby eating is like considered as conspiratorial as like Iran-Contra, which is a real thing that happened. It's like very easily provable. But it's like, so I feel like this effort that is so transparently cynical to stifle information. I mean, that's the thing about Kennedy too, is there's so many documents that should have been released by now that haven't been released or are still redacted.
Well, that's the proof in the pudding right there. I mean, even with like the shit that was going on when Trump, when everyone was so convinced that that's the, you know, the orange sociopath was at least, at the very least, he'll give us the docs. And then even the stuff that we got too. Exactly. I mean, what's astounding here is that sentiment that King has of just well, you know, you're crazy if you believe it. I feel like that didn't really hit the true mainstream culture until like 2016, when a lot of those things started bubbling up and we basically just lost our fucking minds as a society, and there's no truth anymore. It's over in a post-truth, post-science society. And great times we live in. That's why I would gladly take a trip back to the 70s and just be able to have the comfort of knowing that all that craziness would be 40 or 50 years later. But anyway, so I say all this just because I do think there is this. He's almost like weirdly ahead, like, it sounds awful, but like he's almost weirdly ahead of the curve in that sentiment, because everyone's going towards that area anyway. Because like, you know, as we discussed with the Iran-Contra thing, like that was clear as day. I literally did like multiple dissertations on everything that happened in Nicaragua, everything that happened with the Sandinistas, and how all that shit was manipulated, and it's all there. That you could see the true source materials. That's all there. And I think by 9/11, when you literally have people coming forward saying, you know, it's like the famous Condoleezza Rice quote. It's just like, you know, I believe we got letters that said, you know, they planned to attack, you know, the World Trade Center. And then you tie that in with everything else, but then you get kind of blemished with the online culture with like the loose change shit, which honestly, a lot of the stuff in there is interesting. It's curious in the same way that the Kennedy stuff is curious.
But we can't we can't understand that like sometimes it's about evidence, not conclusions.
Exactly.
And I think that's the big thing with the researchers that I've spoken with, is they don't claim to have a clear answer. They're not saying Lyndon Johnson was standing on the grassy knoll with a gun. That's not like that's what they've been. But I know, isn't that a funny image?
Just like whoa, what's Johnson doing here?
But like, that's how I think a lot of conspiracy discourse has been framed by the media, and which is basically like, oh, these people think that it was like Satan in a trench coat who pulled the trigger or whatever, or it was, you know, literally Lyndon Johnson or something like that. When more so it's about gathering evidence that doesn't add up and living in these weird tensions where there aren't any clear answers. And that to me is a lot more compelling and a lot more interesting generally than saying, I have read a few books, and I believe without a doubt that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone.
Yeah.
And that is,
Jen.
Totally agree. And I also want to say Lyndon B. Johnson is King's Dominion because Clancy Brown plays him in The Crown.
Oh.
And as we know, Clancy Brown is
Amazing.
from King's
Good
Dominion.
pull.
Interesting.
And yeah, I have The Crown on the brain, but it's also relates to what we're talking about, because when I think about like what I find the most interesting about these conspiracy theories, it kind of relates to my thoughts about true crime. And I think I kind of, at some point, maybe it was around the time Making a Murderer came out, I kind of released myself from having to figure it out. And I remember watching that and was like, you know what? It's not my job to decide what happened here. It's not
evidence,
Exactly. Yeah. And I think but I also think that the conclusions that people come to, I think, are more interesting to me personally than what actually happened. Like, I am really fascinated by King's. I agree with you. I feel like the shade that he throws on people that don't agree with me, like, puts me off. But I think it's really interesting that he says it's scarier to me if it's a lone gunman. And I think that's coming from a public figure who has probably had stalker fans. And so to him, maybe the scarier thing is a guy who has a gun, just walks up to my house and shoots me.
Like Jim
Whereas,
Dooley or
which
something.
is a true chaos agent. And I understand that. Yeah.
But also, like, I'm also coming off of just finishing the last season of The Crown, where they cover the death of Princess Di. And so it's really interesting to me that the way they portray that and the conspiracy theories, I think, that they explore and the ones that they don't, because that is the story that they are telling. And I think that the narrative that King is trying to tell here is that it is the chaos agent is more compelling or more scary. And I think narratively, I already have JFK, so I can enjoy 11/22 for this, and then I can enjoy JFK for what it is. And I don't know if I see the two merging very well. And I just have released myself from really having to decide which one I think is true, and that way I can really enjoy both.
Which is the healthiest way to go about this.
It really is.
Yeah, no.
Because I get so worked up about this shit, and I wouldn't have if it wasn't for the afterword. Because I'm and that is where it drives me crazy.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, it does seem too that it's either a conspiracy theory is a social media update, like a few sentences, or it's a 1,200 page tome of too much information, and there's nothing in the middle, right? It's either too quick or too much to swallow.
Yeah.
Well, that's
and especially
culture at large now.
No, but that's but specifically with conspiracy theories, right? Like, we saw the susceptibility of boomers to believing a Facebook update, even though they warned us, hey, don't believe everything in the internet, rebel. But then the ones who fell most, they were the most gullible to it. Versus, and I've read a few other JFK conspiracy books, and it does, at a certain point, you get lost in the weeds of, like, okay, you're bringing in, there's so much information going on here, and especially the fact that it's speculative, it's a lot to digest and process. So just going back to King sort of maybe streamlining it and having it focus more on Oswald than everything else that was going on, it could have went on for 400 more pages if it really, at least even acknowledged every thread of what could have happened, right?
And that's so interesting.
Maybe that's what he's really afraid of.
Yeah, well, what you're saying, like, American Tabloid and Libra are great books because they live in the they live in the weeds, right? They don't have answers. They're like, we're gonna live in the chaos and not have like one clear ending or solution. Whereas King needed that for his story, which I fully support, but that's I think what makes those other books interesting in their own way.
Because there is a version of this where, especially if it's that early 70s version, where let's go back to the 2007 pitch that he had, like the radiation poisoning and going back to stop himself. There is this slightly Creepshow-esque, more Twilight Zone-esque sentiment that could have been the story where he has to keep going back and trying to find and test each different conspiracy theory and going back. And then he's starting to get radiation and he only has enough time to actually do it by then. But we didn't get that book. And instead, I'm sorry, Randall, but we've got a few more quotes that are probably going to burn your blood a little bit.
Let me run through them, and I won't just I'll run through this just so I'm not like derailing anything, because I do get worked up about this stuff, but I'm going to limit myself. And again, like I said, like you quote this Errol Morris interview, that was actually when I talked to Jim DiEugenio, he actually used that as sort of a structure to discuss the places where he took issue with what King had done.
Read that one quote that I pulled out though, because I think that's a good
yeah. So King was ready for the backlash as he told Errol Morris, "I'm prepared for trouble when the book comes out. Conspiracy people guard themselves pretty jealously. They have their theories, and some of them are pretty complex and some of them are pretty simple. Some of them have been disproved. But one of the things that sticks in my mind is that none of them have been proved. None of them. So it's like UFOs. If they're really UFOs, how come one has never landed or we've never been given definitive proof?" I'm not going down that route, because then I will talk for 3 hours. Because it's not as if the lone shooter theory has been proven in any way, shape, or form either. So the flattening drives me crazy. But also he says, conspiracy people guard themselves pretty jealously. Have you read the afterword? He's every bit as defensive and in that crouched defensive position as many conspiracy theorists are, which is like, I'm like, that is what drives me a little crazy. Okay. Morris presses him more though, adding, resolved or unresolved, the mystery of what happened stands behind everything. It is perhaps unavoidable. And asked King why it's become such a persistent storm of mystery. So King said, well, the reason is, I would say, because Ruby shot Oswald. And when Ruby shot Oswald, he shut his mouth. He permanently silenced him. So there was never any light cast from that standpoint. As a result, you have all these witnesses who stepped forward, who saw this and saw that and saw guys on the grassy knoll and this and that and the other thing. It's a little bit like the blind man describing the elephant. One's got the trunk and says it's a snake, and one's got a leg and says it's a tree. One's got an ear and says it's a banana plant. They all say different things because none of them can see the whole thing. The only one who could really tell us what happened is dead. I'm not saying he would have, but I think he would have. I believe he would have if he did it. And I do think he did it. And I think that's actually a very valid quote, because that is very true about how we look at history and how the minute an event has concluded, or the people who are involved are no longer around, there is no way to get answers. You know what I mean? And so, but I think, like, for me, the natural result is to approach it with curiosity rather than a kind of close-minded, here's the answer I am going to accept. But I think sometimes we want answers. So I think, especially as we get older, we don't want to live in that state of unknowing, And I think that's really, I think there's comfort in that. There's comfort in the idea that it was just one guy. There's also terror in the idea that it was one guy. But I think sometimes, like, having an answer is preferable. And there's a lot of answers that are available for all of us. There are.
So they do address this early on in the section that we're covering today, which is the Watershed Moment. On page 66 of my paperback. No, well, don't worry, I have the first edition. I was around for it, but I bought the paperback because I want to underline things, and
I was worried. Yes,
don't worry. I wanted to see a blue duck, and I drew a blue duck. But so on page 66, they talk about the conspiracy theories of Jake and Al. They said, Manchester said that if you put the murdered president on one side of the scale and Oswald, the wretched waif, on the other, it didn't balance. No way did it balance. If you wanted to give Kennedy's death some meaning, you'd have to add something heavier, which explains the proliferation of conspiracy theories, like the mafia did it, Carlos Marcello ordered the hit, or the KGB did it, or Castro to get back at the CIA for trying to load him up with poisoned cigars. There are people to this day who believe Lyndon Johnson did it. Hey, that's me. So he could be president. But in the end, Al shook his head. It was almost certainly Oswald. You've heard of Occam's razor, haven't you? And the Occam's razor thing is certainly a principle that King leans on in a lot of these interviews, and talking about, sometimes it's just, that's the clearest answer is right there. It's just, it's right there at the day. And
it's only the clearest answer because that was the narrative we were given. If you actually consider the fact, are we really supposed to believe that Oswald shot 6 rounds from that particular rifle, or no, 3 rounds from that particular rifle in 6 seconds? That is not the clearest answer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like that. It pushes the strains of reality. And I think that's like what drives me a little crazy. It's only Occam's razor, because that is the official narrative.
Yeah. And look, again, this is a good way to button it up, because I think we know that there's the context out there. And that's something I think we all really wanted to stress on this episode, first and foremost, and certainly one we want to explore in the episodes that Randall's going to be, the interviews that Randall has done. And that, I think that's an area that we couldn't do this series without actually at least acknowledging all that stuff. I think we all agree that the streamlining it with Oswald certainly made this a far more enjoyable tale. And so we're going to move on a little bit, but we've got a little bit more to talk about the research. So in addition to visiting areas like in Dallas, and also watching the Zapruder video, or, you know, the videos of Kennedy, you know, King also drew from memory. You know, after all, he was born in 1947, so he lived in the 50s and 60s, and the writing process for him unlocked a lot of those feelings and images from that memory warehouse, including the assassination itself. Flieger, why don't you read the story he told to the Scotsman in 2011? It's a really...
Hey, Scotsman, happy to do it. Trying to quote my grandma or great grandma from
Are you
Scotland.
Scottish?
Yes.
Oh.
Crush you like a worm.
Oh.
It's my favorite quote from Braveheart.
Braveheart.
Yeah. I was in a converted hearse. I lived in a little tiny town. Think of a little tiny town in Scotland with all the dirt roads, and there was no high school. There was a grammar school, but it was just 4 rooms. We had to pick a high school that was nearby, and there was no bus. So a bunch of parents clubbed together and hired this guy who converted a hearse into a half-assed limousine. And there were 9 or 10 of us who went back forth 14 miles to the nearest high school. I'm assuming the driver he's talking about here, he says he was this real quiet guy who never heard the radio. We hated that because we all loved rock and roll. It was the early 60s, and only 2 times that radio ever went on was during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And then one day when we got out of school, we got in the car and the radio was on, and we were grab-assing around the way the kids are at the end of the school day. And this guy came on and said, "The president is dead." And there was just total silence. And what I remember best is that Mike, the driver who never said anything, he wouldn't say shit if he had a mouthful. He said, "They will kill the son of a bitch who did it if they catch him." And they caught him, and somebody killed him, sure enough.
Yeah, it's
pretty keen insight.
Yeah,
to the Jack Ruby issue.
I do love the King was so good at creating moments within the moments. Mm-hmm. You know, like what I remember best. Like that's just born storyteller right there.
Totally.
So I don't know. Like that's just caught me in that quote. So he also, you know, King also talked to Footman. Who would have known this Tesco blogs interview became so imperative to our research here. It's how great. Hey, that's just a sign that spread the wealth when it comes to interviews. You know, that I'm talking to PR agents out there, PR agents who are listening to the Losers Club discuss 1122. Anyway, he talked to Footman about how the process of this book offered some time traveling for himself. So he said, actually, Jen, why don't you take this one?
Okay.
I've talked way too much. So
the act of writing is almost an act of hypnosis. You can remember things that are not immediately accessible to the conscious mind. I felt extremely challenged as I began this book. Could I really capture the sense of what it was like to live between 1958 and 1963? By writing, like anything imaginative, is an act of faith. You have to believe that those details will be there when you need them. The more I wrote about those years, the more I remembered. I used research when I fell short, but it was amazing how much came back to me. The sound coins made when you dropped them into the machine, when you got on the bus, the smell of movie theaters when everybody was smoking, the dances, the teenage slang, books that were current, and the importance of the library and research.
Now, I'm a big believer in research. My entire life was dedicated to it, and that's why these episodes are fucking long and my scripts are ridiculous. But I do think that experience is a big deal. And I know that so much, especially in academic discourse about especially controversial topics, now the de facto way of hearing about it is through someone who has an experience on it. And I think that there's value in that for sure. I think you certainly need that. But again, I think if you can find the right sources and research, I think there's ways that someone can extrapolate on something that happened in history. Having said that, I do want to talk about experience for a second, because I want to see, when you're reading this book, especially the first 100 pages, especially that glimpse of the 50s, does this seem like it's coming from someone who actually was able to live there? Like, could someone have kind of had some of those insights just kind of looking at magazines, maybe seeing certain things? Like, is there an inherent quality to the writing that we've read so far where you get the idea that, oh yeah, King certainly knows what he's fucking talking about here?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, there is a touch of this. I think we're all born in the 80s or around then, but there's a way the 80s are portrayed where it's neon colors, whereas it actually was mostly browns and like ashtrays and McDonald's. So
Wood paneling.
yeah, exactly. Like, so King, he experienced the 50s, but he wasn't, he was a kid still. So I think there is a little bit of it being idealized, right? But to me, like the detail that brings it is like they're getting the root beer. And just this idea of like, it's not alcohol, but you go there, you pay, it's like a nickel for a root beer, and it's just that taste and the sweet. To me, that's kind of when I locked in and was like, okay, I'm around for this. Like, I like this way that he's portraying it.
Yeah, because it's not like a summation of the 50s. It's like his experience. And that's what I think I really connect to with the story. Like, the more that I think about it, and as I'm looking through all of this research, like, I don't think that I would be a historian. I think it would be more like an anthropologist. Like, I am more interested in the individual experiences and how those kind of run, the currents that run through all of that. And I think that's what really sings in this novel, which I think is another kind of reason I like the lone gunman thing for this story. But yeah, I think that's something that King is really, really good at just in general. Part of why I really like his writing so much. And I like that we have a really strong mix of the two of these in the story. Because I think the research could easily get really dry. Sorry, Mike.
Yeah.
What does GQ think? Or is that Rosa?
This is GQ on my lap right now, and he loves root beer himself. So he also loved the sections where King was drinking 50s root beer.
So right now for listeners, Randall's holding his new dog, and so I did want to ask, Marley and Me, big novel. Was the dog's point of view appropriately written? GQ, what do you think?
GQ says he prefers the movie of Marley and Me because he's a big Owen Wilson fan.
That's a hot take, GQ.
But he says the book is adequately rendered, or at least the dog's perspective. Yeah. He said it's good for a human.
Oh, not bad. Thanks, GQ.
He prefers the Kojak chapter of The Stand.
Oh yeah. Hey, a lot of us do.
Yeah.
Does he also like the meeting notes though? Because that's
meeting notes.
Oh, he's actually looking at the mic. Oh my God.
He said.
That's a yes.
He said he finds the meeting notes interesting, but wishes that there wasn't so much sex interspersed throughout it.
It's true.
Or Cujo, less sex.
Yeah. He does love Cujo.
So, speaking on experience, the novel also starts off in Lisbon Falls, which is a very real place and also close to King's heart. An online writer by the name of Sister Mary Murderess has some pretty stellar insight into this in her review on the Read Me Deadly blog. She writes, Lisbon Falls is very real. Most of the places and institutions King describes actually existed, and some still do. The Warumbo meal. Okay. Meal.
That's a very weird word to be fair.
It's a weird.
Warumbo meal.
Jen, can you say Warumbo?
Warumbo Mill.
Okay, but you know what? You read the rest of this because I clearly can't read for shit. So go for it.
I just want to thank Craig Wasson, who has been reading the audiobook that I'm listening to. He nails Warumbo every time.
Yeah.
Incredible.
The Warumbo Mill, St. Cyril's, the Kennebec Fruit Company, the Lisbon Enterprise newspaper, the Jolly White Elephant, the Red and White grocery store, the Hi-Hat Drive-In, Balmer's Barbershop, Dunton's Jewelry, and the Holly, and many of the people he places in Lisbon Falls are or were real, like Frank Anicetti, senior and junior, former and current proprietors of the Kennebec Fruit Company, John Gould, former editor of the Lisbon Enterprise, and many others. Durham, Maine, across from the Androscoggin River from Lisbon Falls, and went to Lisbon High School. He was a high school reporter from the Lisbon Enterprise. He worked for a time at the Warumbo Mill, and like Jake, he had a credential to teach English.
This is King, by the way.
Sorry.
I fucked up by not including the fact that so King was.
You probably ate at the Hi-Hat. That was my Mike King impression.
Yeah. Oh, no, but I'm saying she's talking about King for the Durham, Maine stuff. So,
okay. King probably ate at the Hi-Hat, got his hair cut at Balmer's, and brought groceries at the Red and White. I won't speculate about whether he frequented the Holly, a dive bar and one-time strip club.
Well, where do you think he got the name?
I think King broke from his prior practice in using a real location, Lisbon Falls, so that he could acknowledge the part the town's places and people played in his life.
Yeah,
That's cool.
I think that's really
a
cool.
lot of words. Yeah.
Well, the reason why I found this is because there's another King's Dominion that involves Dunton later on that I just was like, wait a second. There's moments in this book where I've been underlining certain things to see like this. I got to look this up. So I was charmed to see, especially having gone to Bangor where we see so much of it becoming Derry through Jamie's tour. To be able to see that actually he's working in reality here and some of these characters were real, it's cool. I mean, that's fucking awesome. Like the Anicetti, the Anicetti, and it's Anicetti.
Anicetti is what Craig Wasson said.
Okay, cool. Well,
And
then I'm
he
going to
was
go with
in
Bill Maher.
Nightmare
And
3,
Craig Wasson
so-
would never lie.
He would never lie, especially not to Freddy Krueger.
No.
Or in Ghost Story. So yeah, I mean, imagine being part of that family and just knowing that like the history of your store and
It'd be funny if they made him look like assholes. Though.
Yeah, just like it's like he comes over. It's just
Old
like
man Anicetti's at it again.
he's like Anicetti's just like he's like saying racist shit all throughout the book.
Right. He's like got a basement murder children's room.
Yeah. Or then like he makes the Anicetti kind of like King's Dominion. It's like Anicetti had a young boy that he adopted, a boy named Frank Dodd. That's just like what?
When we meet
Randall
Bev later,
Flagg.
she's just like, keep your distance from old man Anicetti. He's got grabby hands. You know?
We're just joking. It didn't happen. This is all history. Not history, I should say.
It's alternative history.
Yeah. And speaking of alternative history, let's talk about the time travel for a second. So in 2011, King spoke to Wired, of course it's Wired, about the mechanics of time travel. I'm going to try to read this one in my best Doc Brown voice. There's a kind of rule that you'd express as a ratio. The more potential a given event has to change the future, the more difficult that event would be to change. If you wanted to go back and speak to somebody on a street corner so that they were 5 minutes late to an appointment, that might not be too hard. But if you wanted to stop the assassination of a president, that would be really difficult, Marty. I just have to add the Marty because this doesn't sound anything like Doc Brown.
No, I thought it did. I thought it was great.
The past would try to protect itself.
Marty.
So that's kind of the mantra for just where he was getting at for how he was going to look at the mechanics of the time travel. But he also brings up the butterfly effect, and King has an answer the interview brings up the butterfly effect, and King has an answer for it. So Dan, I want you to do your best Ashton Kutcher voice.
I want to yes and for my improv training, but I actually really am not familiar with Ashton Kutcher's voice at all.
Okay.
He was good in Vengeance, which I saw recently, but I never watched that 70s show. So can I also do Doc Brown?
Yeah.
Is that a fair?
Yeah, go for it. Try to do Doc Brown. Let's see what you can do.
Okay, I'll try to do Doc Brown.
It's hard.
The butterfly effect has a part in it, but my thought was that every time you go back and change something, you create an alternate timeline. There are these guardians who stand over you, watch like all the time portals, because they understand that whenever you go back, you damage the space-time continuum. At the end, Jake meets one of them who tells him, every time you do this, you make the situation worse. And if you continue to do it, everything collapses. To me, that's pretty horrible. Sorry, that's my best.
It was good. It was
it.
good. There was a little bit of Christopher Walken in there, which is fitting because hey, King's Dominion, Dead Zone. Also, he at one point, Christopher Walken was going to be Han Solo, which is kind of
you got to control the pace.
Right,
But yeah,
the butterfly effect has a part in it.
butterfly effect.
Okay, so one of my favorite aspects of this novel is the mechanics of time traveling. Here is, I think it's really smart. I love the 2-minute jaunt. I love the idea that everything resets upon returning back. I just think it's a really smart way to do this trope, and I'm big on time travel stories. Like, give me any time travel story, even the Guy Pearce remake. I'm all in.
I gotta say, I came around on the time travel a little bit because I think at first I kind of laughed at how simplistic it was, like where it was just easy because he's like, oh no, it just resets every time. I don't know why. I'm not gonna, like Al's always like, don't ask me these questions. I don't have any answers, and it's like, oh, okay, you're just trying to kind of make it easy on yourself. And I don't mind that because it allows for more, I think, just an easier, like, it's a vessel to tell a bigger story that isn't really about time travel ultimately. But then the kind of trick of the end is you realize, oh no, all of these things did matter because early on you're like, Oh, okay. Well, if everything just resets every time you go, then I guess nothing really ultimately matters. But then you realize, oh no, it's all there is an accumulation. It's just not one that we can necessarily see. And like it's a more like, multiversal kind of thing. And that to me is a really neat trick that King plays.
There's a really good parallel to that in the Wired interview because he says the idea of the reset was one of the more interesting things about the book to me. You can get the idea from computers where you can delete all this material and start over again, and it never even leaves a mark. You just highlight everything, bop, delete, and it's gone. And the author in the Wired article, because of course, was like, well, actually, it doesn't get deleted. As we know, the Windows 95 processor doesn't.
You know, McGrath Tyson interviewing him.
Yeah,
not so fast.
Not so fast, Stephen. But yeah, he basically points out that like, no, it exists somewhere, and then that's when King's like, yes, that's where the ending comes into fruition. Is that like all this stuff is backed up somewhere, and someone has to hold on to it. And when you do think about that, it is kind of adds a little bit more pathos to one certain character we'll talk about.
The card men like being driven insane.
Yeah, like
no, I got another job.
Just like I can't do this anymore. It's like he's holding on to the strings of time. Do we think we were more susceptible to the time travel devices here because of the Dark Tower? I mean, Fleer, you read all the Dark Tower up at this point, right? Like, because you devoured.
I skimmed them, Cliff Notes.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure.
I've read. Yeah, I pretty much read all the materials. But I know what you're saying, and even that is like interdimensional with time travel, so it makes it complicated.
Did it seem when you were reading this for the first time and you didn't even blink an eye? It was just like, oh yeah, this seems like it's in King's Dominion.
I think you could do a whole novel on the mechanics of time travel, but it's just easier to accept it and be like, you go here, you come back, it's 2 minutes have passed.
Yeah.
Versus every single time a character encounters it, it's like, well, wait, can you explain this to me? Which is what, if you want to get, that's too technical to be interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm like, if somebody says this happens, you used the word jaunt earlier. Yeah. We don't fully understand the mechanics of the jaunt. We know the scientists researched it. It's the effects that are interesting. So I think with this, the effects of the time travel are more interesting than the actual mechanics or explanation of it. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, that's once you know the formula, or at least just the overview of the mechanics, it does make it that much more easier. I mean, I'm just thinking of an alternative version of this where it's like the movie Primer, where you're just like constantly just like going into the nitty gritty of things, and I'd be like, fuck.
Exactly.
I do too. It's
great movie, but you're right. It gets so too. It's not. I wouldn't rewatch that movie. You know what I mean?
I've seen it 3 times for some reason, probably because it's only like 80 minutes. But it's like that's a really fun movie in terms of that it gets so into the weeds.
Yeah.
That becomes its hook,
Yeah.
I think about it like Corey and I used to joke when we were watching Sons of Anarchy, because we just did not care about the club's inner dynamics. So we were just like, it's something with the Mayans, that's what the business is. So that's every time I encounter this time travel thing, I'm like, it's something with the Mayans.
It's the Mayans.
What's your favorite time travel movie or device or book or,
Mine?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, aside from this, which probably is it, Back to the Future.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to go wrong there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What is
and it's got a Jennifer in it, so
That's true.
I saw Back to the Future 2 before I saw Back to the Future 1 as a kid.
I think I might have too. Yeah.
Were you
must
probably
have
like
been so confused?
I know.
I was like, who is?
Well, they kind of recap the first movie.
Dance?
I know. I'm kind of totally kidding. Like when you're young too, I watched Return of the Jedi like 100 times before I ever watched the first 2 Star Wars movies.
Yeah, I saw Jaws 3 before any of them. So.
Are you fucking kidding me? Jaws 3 before Jaws? Like
it was on TV all the time.
That is wild. That is. I'm trying to think of what's a worse sequel to start off with. Like I guess like you did
Hellraiser Bloodlines,
Terminator Genesis.
Terminator. That's right.
Terminator
Fair enough.
Genesis.
That is the worst one to start off with. All right, I want to talk about the date, September 9th, 1958. Do we have any theories on why this is the exact date that King chose? I mean, I couldn't find any quotes as to why he did. Other than the fact that the headline that Jake runs into on the Globe is Dulles hints concessions if Red China renounces Dulles hints concessions if Red China renounces use of force in Formosa. It
could have been as simple as like trying to, by choosing that headline, trying to show that there was geopolitical strife like in the world that Jake was entering into, to I think maybe help shatter, like you mentioned earlier, Fligger, like to maybe help shatter a little bit of the idyllic nature. But I don't have a big theory as to why this day. Maybe the day has some kind of like personal meaning to him.
Yeah,
I do.
Formosa was like a Republic of Taiwan, I think, in like turn of the century.
yeah.
This is when I like to get my conspiracy theory hat on, is to try to figure out what King is thinking when he has written every sentence that he's ever written. So my theory, and I could be completely wrong, but I think, so in Danse Macabre, he talks about a pivotal moment in his life when he was at the movies and the movie announcer came in and said Sputnik had just launched. And that was 1957. It was not 1958, but I bet he maybe had originally had him go back to 1957. And then maybe as he was editing, it was like, hey, if I put it in 1958, I can do the it thing, you know? And so he changed it to 1958. Also, isn't his birthday in September?
It is, yeah.
And 9th is kind of like 19. And I think he just happened to find this headline that kind of does what we all think it does. And I agree with that, but I think it was just a happy coincidence. So that's my conspiracy theory.
I like that.
I co-sign.
Yeah, I do too. Especially because it does allow him to do, which, you know, for those that are actually reading with us.
Yeah.
And hasn't read the book, you know, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna get to the first 97 pages. You know, we already mentioned dairy. So I'm sorry, you know, shit happens, but it's dairy is in this book, so just get ready. So it does make sense that there would be a connection. I went back and looked at all the stuff that was happening in 1958 leading up to this date. So here's where America was at on this date. The president is Dwight D. Eisenhower. The vice president is Richard Nixon. The chief justice is Earl Warren. In January, the first successful American satellite, Explorer 1, is launched into orbit. In February, Ruth Carroll Taylor is the first African-American woman hired as a flight attendant, working for Mohawk Airlines. Her career only lasts 6 months due to another discriminatory barrier, the airline's ban on married flight attendants.
What
it's
the fuck were we
I know.
doing back then?
It's strange. I know.
I mean, it doesn't surprise me, but, you know.
Lots of things founded, though. So in March, Warner Brothers Records, the company which would later become Warner Records, is founded by its namesake.
Which would eventually release Gary Dauberman's Salem's Lot.
That's true. Yeah. Warner Brothers Pictures, which is the home of a lot of the King stuff, too. So.
Or not release it, I guess.
Or not release it. We'll see, you know. The same month, the USS Wisconsin is decommissioned. And it left the U.S. Navy without an active battleship for the first time since 1896.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
Somebody went back in time to prevent the release of Dauberman's Salem's Lot, and that's why we don't have.
Don't blow up my game, Jen.
Or stop Miss Taylor from getting married.
Yeah, it'll be 9/22/23.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And you just go back and when they probably made a formal discussion about it. Anyway,
sorry, Mike. I didn't mean.
No, it's totally fine. By April, unemployment in Detroit reaches 20%, marking the height of the recession of 1958 in the United States. So there was a recession going on. This is wild. So that same month, the San Francisco Giants beat the Los Angeles Dodgers 8-0 at San Francisco Seals Stadium in the first Major League Baseball regular season game ever played in California.
Wow.
So that's wild. 1958. I thought that was pretty late.
California's big.
Also big is the Pizza Hut chain, which opened its first restaurant in Wichita, Kansas in June 15th of 1958. I can't tell what's more important. So Pizza Hut was in June, but in July, the U.S. Congress formally created the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. NASA, ever heard of that? So
well, if you're looking at who has been more successful, maybe Pizza Hut.
That is true. You know, they had a commercial in the movie theater last night for Pizza Hut, and I was just like, God, what the fuck happened to this brand? Like,
I know.
It's just
Food probably
worst.
tastes better on the space shuttle at this point.
I know. It's so gross. Anyway, this episode is sponsored by our friends at Pizza Hut. You know, wings.
We're sponsored by Domino's. They're like, make sure to shit on Pizza Hut in our history section.
Hey, look,
the salad bar? Just come in.
Yeah, there are these things called Pizza Hut Classics that are all around, and talk about time traveling. I'd like to go to one of those. Unfortunately, I think the food still tastes the same as the modern dime, so no good.
Probably.
Tim Robbins, who is in the Shawshank Redemption, King's Dominion, he was in a movie called The Hudsucker Proxy, and he says it's a toy, right? With the hula hoop. I believe it's the hula hoop in that movie, right?
Yeah.
So that same month that NASA was created, July 1958, the hula hoop was first marketed. So how about that? You can get a hula hoop in 1958 and look up to the stars and see the satellites. So then in August, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed the Federal Aviation Act of 1958, transferring all authority over aviation in the U.S. to the newly created Federal Aviation Agency, FAA, later renamed Federal Aviation Administration. So we got NASA, the FAA, Pizza Hut, first ball game in the West Coast. And then in September, the University of New Orleans begins classes as the first racially integrated public university in the Southern United States. So that's pretty much the beginning, I believe, of what the 60s are going to lead on to. But more importantly than anything, and more importantly even than September 11th, 2001, in September 11th of 1958, 2 days after Jake arrives in Lisbon Falls, 1958, the world got actor Scott Patterson.
Is that Strom from
Strom? Strom from Saw.
And Luke
from Gilmore Girls. So yeah. I think that was pretty
He'll
important.
Always be Strom.
It's Strom. Strom's born, and we get NASA, and we get Pizza Hut, and we get the hula hoop, and there's a lot of stuff happening. Pop culture wise, some iconic movies released in 1958. And all right, film historians, I know that there's more, but these are the ones I pulled out.
These are big ones.
So Touch of Evil.
Good movie.
Vertigo.
Yeah.
Gigi.
Don't know it.
South Pacific. Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. Not to be mistaken.
That is a good movie.
It's a good movie, yeah.
Well, it's based on a very famous play.
A Dr. Seuss mashup of that, though.
Yeah.
Cat in a Hat, Tin Roof.
With Mike Myers somehow in it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he's reprising
that is
his
the kind
role.
of thing Mike Myers would parody in like a cat movie.
Yeah. In his glory days. Some popular music released in 1958. So much out there. And King is really insistent on talking about how this was like pre-Beatles. And in one of the interviews, he speculates whether or not, I think it's the Perota interview, he talks about like how we never, John F. Kennedy never got to hear the Beatles. And that actually like saddened King. And then they were trying to discuss like if Robert F. Kennedy liked the Beatles, and they asked the crowd. It's a nice little moment, but the Beatles were no longer, they weren't here in this moment. In fact, I think Paul McCartney in this year did his first concert in Liverpool alone. But in 1958, people were listening to Volare by Domenico Modugno. Volare. That's like, it was like the number one hit of that year. It was all over the place. If you listen to it, you'll know what it is. They had there's also "Come Dance with Me" by Nice Guy Frank Sinatra, "Lollipop" by the Chordettes, King's Dominion.
Stand by Me.
Stand by Me. Yeah. All I Have to Do Is Dream by the Everly Brothers. One of my first concerts.
R.I.P.
Great Balls of Fire by Jerry Lee Lewis was also King's Dominion because it plays in Stand by Me as well. Maybe Baby by Buddy Holly. Elvis Presley's Don't. The Champs Tequila, used great with Paul Rubens in Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Wow, that song's older than I thought.
Yeah, I'm surprised by that one.
I mean, I'm pretty sure they used the original one in Pee-wee. I don't know if it's like some modernized version of it. I think it is this original one.
I like that you have Chucky Berry.
I know. That was I think my because we're doing the Chucky season.
On the brain.
My
also,
my AI does for sure.
A song called "Sweet 16" by Chuck Berry is a little bit uncomfortable in retrospect.
It really is, yeah. But one of my favorite.
Man made some great music.
He did make some.
Also,
great
Back to the Future connection.
I was going to say, yeah. Hey, you know that new sound you're looking for? Well, listen to this.
This is it.
So, and we all remember
about a 16-year-old girl.
Sorry, it's like let me write this. And then, last but not least, I had to put the Monotones, "The Book of Love," which is also in Stand by Me. So,
I like that song.
Good stuff. Good times. What would you have listened to the most? Do you think out of that? What would have been your what would be on your Spotify Wrapped 1958? Tequila. Yeah. Would you have done the dance like every time you listened to it, like Dewey does?
All I have to do is dream. I remember from Ladybugs.
Yeah.
Yes, that's where I know it.
I do like that.
Oh,
sequence.
Jonathan Brandis. Hey, King's Dominion.
Yeah.
R.I.P. King.
Also, weirdly, King's Dominion, because through Rodney Dangerfield in that movie, he also worked with Keith Gordon in Back to School, which Anyway.
Firestarter.
I think Rodney's probably kicking around this time. He has to be. So maybe he's around in 1958.
He's returning his wife
I think
to
he's
the
probably
zoo.
selling aluminum siding.
He was in a handball league with my grandpa in Brooklyn, Rodney Dangerfield. He's
Was
in
he
my
really?
grandpa's yearbook playing handball together.
Was
he
he
funny?
any good at handball?
Hey, I'll tell you what, I got no respect on the handball court.
I could see him just being like, he's like, hey, why don't you lay off on the hand there? Why don't you use your hand for something else?
More hand, less hand, more ball.
What if Rodney Dangerfield was the genesis for Jake Epping? It's just like, oh, you're gonna go back to the 50s.
He's like, hey, my wife told me to go back in time, but I only lasted 2 minutes.
Or he's like, he walks into that grocery store. He's just like, all right, I'll have some naked teas and a pound of meat and.
Get some of
Bang,
these,
don't tell him
three
you're
of these, I'll have
Jewish.
one of these.
It's the 50s. Don't tell him. Yeah, don't tell him you're Jewish.
Don't tell him you're Jewish.
Somebody sit on a duck.
Does someone say?
My favorite.
Love Caddyshack. It's
It
great
looks good
film.
on you, though.
It's wild to think that when Jake goes back to the 50s, if you'd waited even beyond 1963, you could have gone to the first run of Caddyshack, 20-something years later. I
I would
certainly would.
have not killed Oswald so I could
know.
see
Go
Caddyshack
back in
on the
time
big
and wait
screen.
20 years for a movie's release.
Yeah. I would have done it. I would have done it because I want to
I'm
go to...
sure you would have.
Yeah, it would have been great.
You're like, Gremlins 2 is coming out in a few decades. I might
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about the promotion just to wrap this all up. So remember all that talk about the rebranding for King? Well, the Wall Street Journal, in that same piece I referenced 5 hours ago on this episode, they offered a fairly comprehensive rundown of the marketing campaign, which, as I mentioned earlier too, King helped piece together for Scribner. Essentially, they really were targeting history buffs with book giveaway promotions on bio.com and history sites. And to reach news junkies, Scribner actually bought ad time on 11 p.m. news programs in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. They also secured spots to run on the CNN Airport Network and on the A&E and Sci-Fi channels. I love that Sci-Fi gets thrown in there. It's like, I don't know if that many history
It was
buffs.
called different back in the day too. It was actually sci-fi, like science fiction.
And it's funny too because it's like the history channel has become Sci-Fi. So that's all they talk about is just the what ifs and aliens. There was an ad that was around. There was like a 30-second commercial that featured archival footage of Kennedy's Dallas motorcade, and there's like a voiceover that says like, "What if instead of just changing history, or no." Fuck, I fucked that up. What if instead of just watching history, you could change it? I remember actually seeing this commercial a lot. And I do actually recall a lot of this promo. Does anyone else? Do you remember when this was? Did this feel like an event? I mean, King was obviously on our minds because we were somewhat constant readers at that point. But do you recall like feeling like this felt more like an event than the other books?
I do. I remember him on Good Morning America giving an interview about it. Yeah. And I think actually this might have been the time that I started my chronological reread too.
Yeah.
So I was like,
I remember this feeling weightier than other releases.
Yeah.
A lot of King books, I think you would just go to a bookstore and suddenly, oh shit, there's a new King,
Exactly.
Like even as a big fan, that would happen. Because I didn't, back then it wasn't as easy, I think, to track like when stuff was being released.
Yeah.
Or I didn't follow the forums. I didn't go to his website. I loved him, but I was just never that kind of fan. And then, but I remember the lead up to this one, and I got it pretty soon after it came out. So
Yeah, I don't remember ever seeing a King commercial other than
Maximum
doing research
Overdrive.
for this podcast. But my library had the 14-day new releases right when you walked in. So that's the first thing I remember seeing is like several hardcover copies at the library.
I remember hearing about I guess it's to the credit of this marketing campaign. I just remember hearing about other people reading this book that I never would have in a million years guessed that they were like King readers, which is, I guess, the impetus of this whole campaign. But this is something that King definitely doesn't really do anymore. So to promote the book, King went on a book tour. And it was themed to the book with appearances at the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library, and which we referenced with the Proto interview earlier and throughout this episode. He went to the 6th floor museum in Dallas, the site that Oswald fired from. And then he also visited the museum in Boston, which I still think he would do because he could drive there. Because let's just say he has a fear of flying, which we've learned over the years, and wonders that's why he doesn't do as many appearances around the nation anymore. We talked a little bit. I mean, we talked already earlier about the insistence on this kind of marketing, so I don't think we need to go back to it. But let's talk about when the reviews that came out of it. In November 8th, 2011, the book arrived. which is kind of funny because you'd think that like, all right, you're in November
wait a few
already.
weeks.
Yeah, just wait a few
Right,
weeks. Let's do
yeah.
11/22. But anyway, Randall, you have some reviews and takes on this.
Just a few brief things. They were mostly positive. The New York Times named it one of the 5 best fiction books of the year. Las Vegas Review Journal called it one of King's best novel in more than a decade. It was, lauded by NPR. And then who else? Like pretty much everyone mostly liked it. The Houston Chronicle called it one of King's best books in a long time. People did say it was a bit long, which I think is pretty common. And a couple of quotes I thought were notable. In the New York Times review, Janet Maslin, who kind of became, I think, like one of King's champions at the New York Times.
Still is, too.
Yeah, and like, because he does a lot of interviews with her. When we were doing Under the Dome, he did a really big interview with her, and she was like very taken with Under the Dome. And I think was very interested in what King represented in culture around this time. So this is from her review of 11/22. She said, Mr. King's books have a far stronger real world component than they used to, even when he deals with premises rooted in science fiction. And he has lately written with more heart and soul, leaving the phantasmagorical grisliness behind. Perhaps it's the gravity of the Kennedy assassination that makes this new book so well grounded, but in any case, 11/22/63 does not lay on the terror tricks. Mr. King's description of America in the midst of the Cuban Missile Crisis, fearing imminent nuclear annihilation, is at least as scary as anything he's ever made up. And then in the LA Times, there's also this quote that I like. Throughout his career, King has explored fresh ways to blend the ordinary and the supernatural. His new novel imagines a time portal in a Maine diner that lets an English teacher go back to 1958 in an effort to stop Lee Harvey Oswald. And rewardingly for readers, also allows King to reflect on questions of memory, fate, and free will as he richly evokes mid-century America. The past guards its secrets, this novel reminds us, and the horror behind the quotidian is time itself. That's from like the write-up of the 5 best books of the year at New York Times. LA Times was probably the most negative review. They said that it didn't hang together in a cohesive way. 11/22 reads like 2 books welded together. The first, a follow-up to King's 1986 bestseller It, set in the fictional Maine town of Derry, complete with references to the, I know it's a little weird, and a second, an assassination rhapsody. It takes nearly 300 pages for us to get to Texas, and once we're there, 400 more before the drama peaks. Along the way, there are nice bits of domestic detail as Jake settles down and falls in love with a woman who makes him question his sense of time and belonging. I think the reason for that review is the Kennedy stuff was really emphasized in marketing, and I think that is the hook, and that, it does kind of take a while to get to that fireworks factory. But for me personally, the best parts of the book have nothing to do with Kennedy,
Yeah.
And I think that it's about, this is truly one of those things where it's about the journey, not the destination. If anything, one thing Brennan James and I talk about in our interview is the idea of the assignment that this, like, King, you talked earlier about that King didn't allow this one to unfold organically as much. He was really heavily researched and he knew where he was going from moment one. I think even though that this book really works, I think it works in spite of that, because I think there is a more interesting book, in my opinion, if he never kills Oswald, and even though that, like, I think he was so married to the assignment of killing Lee Harvey Oswald and seeing what would happen if John F. Kennedy lived, that I think he sacrifices in some ways more satisfying and interesting avenues. That's my opinion, but I think it's worth noting. So I think that review is maybe in some ways touched on that, and that the Kennedy aspect is maybe the least interesting part, and it is what the entire marketing and thrust of the book hinges upon. So
Which makes
That's
sense.
part of the reason I didn't read it right away, because I was like, I don't know.
Well, we're all talking about the marketing, we're all talking about what is drawing us in, and what better way to really get into the weeds there than our next section, 2.5 hours later, the hook.
Ah, yes. Don't you see? Don't you see how clear it all is? Not only can you see the future, I can change it. You can change it, exactly.
All right, I'm going to dig into King's thoughts in a minute, but I really want to know, just point blank, gun to your head. Let's say Jake Epping, 1973 version, Dirty Jake, walking up to you with a gun, putting it at you. He says, "What's this book about, punk?" Randall, what's the hook here for you?
You can't change history. Like, I think it, I love what you said earlier, Jen, about this whole idea of like being like hitting that age where you look back and you realize you can't change anything. And I think like truly trying to make the most of the time that you have. Sounds a little corny, but I think ultimately what is most effective about this book is that the tragedy, I think, of not being able to alter history. And the more you try to do that, the more you cause an imbalance in your life and in, I think, the world that as you understand it.
That's the same for me, especially how he keeps talking about how like life turns on a dime. And you just never really can expect when it happens. I mean, we talked a little bit about this, I think, on the Valentine's Day episode, where I was like, because I was coming back from Disney World and I just loved the moment so much that we were on this Tom Sawyer Island, Sammy and I, and I was like, I know this is going to end within seconds. Like I know we're going to be done with Disney World. We're going to be back home. Everything's going to be in the past, and I can't hold on to that time. And it's something that I've really struggled with my whole life. It's just the idea that like these moments, these gasps, they move behind us. And there is a tragedy.
Long December by Counting Crows.
Hey, I actually have him on the phone right now.
I would love to get Adam Duritz on the pod.
Yeah. From what I've heard from my past journalists, it's hard to get him off the phone because he'll just keep talking.
But I adore him.
But yeah, same right there on the same page with you, Randall. Jen, what about you? What is the hook for you in this book?
I think if I had to say one word, it would be Sadie. But I think, and it's interesting because this section is called Watershed Moments. And I think for me, when I think about this book, I think of the pies and I think of the dances. And so like, I think the hook is that those are the actual watershed moments that we should enjoy. It's like there's this magnitude of the JFK assassination and how it changed the world. And then there's this small life where there's so much beauty and so much joy there. And I think for me, it's that finding the joy in the little stuff, And
it speaks to, I think that there is a meta narrative there about like when you really consider, like when we look back at horrible, because I'm going to do this really briefly. I don't want to go too long, but because I love talking about this book in relation to Hearts in Atlantis, which is a book and I do that in my interview, so I'm not going to go long, but basically like the ways that book is about the regret of the baby boomer generation that they weren't able to enact the change that I think they really wanted to during the most revolutionary period in American history in terms of the working class and populism, kind of like all really pushing towards some kind of radical reformation. And then in the wake of like MLK, RFK, JFK, Malcolm X getting murdered. And I think like there's so much regret in Hearts in Atlantis about like, we all just like gave up on our dreams. Everything got worse, but we got richer. We made money and we got plenty of consumer. We got blenders and refrigerators and all this other shit. And like, we're comfortable, but the world is in a worse place. And I think it's interesting that King more or less, I think exercised a lot of demons with that book and 100%. Has moved on to accepting powerlessness. The idea that the only real meaningful change we can enact in the world. And I say this not in a bad way, although I think it can be read multiple ways, but I think like, the small moments, the Jody and Sadie and making friends and cultivating community and making memorable moments with people. That is what life is about. And obsessing over, could I have stopped JFK from being murdered and changed the course of history? I think the older we get, the more we feel the powerlessness that comes with, I feel that every fucking day when I read the news. It's like, everything is so horrible and it can make you feel so powerless to when you ask yourself, how can I make this situation better? Because it's never about the big things that we can do as people who are not part of the 1%. It is about like the small things that we can do in our own communities. And I think that that's sort of in many ways what this book is also getting at. Well,
that kind of plays into something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, that same sentiment that I've pretty much taken to heart now is that, for the longest time, I did argue about stuff online. For the longest time, I was trying to, donate here, making sure that I could get on the, hit the streets for these things, write essays, really try to see there's some way to, seek change in the world. And I think it's just at this point, one of the more doomier aspects of our generation is just seeing how futile that is and how it's not going to go anywhere. And then also seeing how it's actually been in turn to manipulate us. Like I always think back to like when I go and check out at CVS, right? And they always have these, hey, round up or add $1, add $2 or $5.
All that shit's a scam.
And like we'll send it over to the thing. I do it just because of karma, hashtag Taylor Swift. But I think of the idea that,
sorry for saying it's a scam, but it is.
But it is. And it's like, why is it on us to make these giant changes when we've been voting, right? We've been paying for taxes. And I think our generation is really one of the more sober generations to basically say, yeah, that's not going to help. We're never going to push the world and change that. And what I've ultimately concluded is exactly what you just said, is just that, when I see people get so vitriolic online, I'm like, you have too much time to waste on your hands. Like, you should be focusing more on just the things that do make you happy. And I think if more people did that, especially in the goodwill of things, like we'd probably have a better world in our hands, because it's this idea that your world is what you make it with the people around you. And you should try to enjoy that and appreciate that, because it's going to be gone before you know it. And that's kind of why I struggle with like those gasps of times, like when things are so good, it's like, I hate when things have to end. And I don't know, that's certainly one thing I take about it. And I think that's probably why this book shattered me in certain ways that I'll extrapolate on. Flieger, I know this book is all about the beef, though. You love the black market time traveling beef. But maybe
I just like the 2-minute reset.
The 2-minute reset.
Wait. 2-minute reset. That's what I want, because I would probably become a criminal. Like, I would just go back and commit crimes and be like, reset.
Jesus Christ.
But you know what I mean? It's like, I would be like, do I have to wait 5 years to save this guy, or can I just go like, steal a car and shoot people and just come back and be like, reset?
So your way of looking at this is how kids look at Grand Theft Auto, the game. You're just gonna not even play the story, but just fucking drive around and change things.
I mean, I'd try to become like a mafioso criminal. I would try to build my own empire. It's very noble to save Kennedy, but that would not be the first thing I would go to. And I'd also obviously, like, Jake uses gambling to his benefit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that doesn't work out so great for him in the story. But yeah, I don't know. I would be too tempted by the concept that I could just reset things quickly.
Yeah.
And maybe that speaks to my lack of moral fiber. I don't know.
Well, I just got a text. I
would just murder a bunch of people.
Probably would kill a bunch.
There's a DM I just got from the Yellow Card Man. He said, "You have to stop that asshole. He is ruining my life. He keeps resetting the fucking timeline over and over again.
Stop running over pedestrians."
Yes,
and I'll get more into it later on in the series, but I do have a theory that he is left there as an example of what happens when you do abuse the system.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be surprised if the evil work of certain villains in like Dark Tower, for example, there's also mention of Randall Flagg, a man in denim, in this book. But I think they leave him out there to show you the decay that happens if you abuse this and go over and over and over again. So I would hate to become like the Yellow Man or the Yellow Card Man and stuck in that, I don't know, prison of my own construction. But yeah, I'd probably go back and do a lot of crimes.
Okay, cool. Well, that's good to know. Well, hey, look, different folks, different strokes. Let's talk about the epigraphs. There's 3 of them. There's the Norman Mailer quote, which he writes, "It is virtually non-assimilable." God, Jesus Christ. My reading comprehension. Assimilable to our reason that a small lonely man felled a giant in the midst of his limousines, his legions, his throng, and his security. If such a non-entity destroyed the leader of the most powerful nation on earth, then a world of disproportion, Jesus, engulfs us, and we live in a universe that is absurd. This is from his book, Oswald's Tale, An American Mystery, which King leaned on big. Has anyone read Oswald's Tale?
No, but we talk about it a lot in my interviews.
Okay, we'll save it for that then. They do talk about this quote when Errol Morris was talking to King, and King says, "Norman Mailer, who provides an epigram at the beginning of the book, says people find it very difficult to believe it could have happened the way it happened because it suggests an absurd universe. But there it is. The line is pretty conclusive to me." This is kind of like the same sentiment of like Ka, right? Like that, the universe is going to act on its own accord. perhaps, and we just have to kind of bend to its will a little bit, or it kind of seems in the same framework as that. I also wanted to note that Norman Mailer was a special guest on the Gilmore Girls.
Was
2
he
years
really?
before. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, he's
and Errol Morris praised Nathan Fielder, who we mentioned earlier in the episode.
This interesting, very
It's all
Cause a
connected.
wheel. Yeah.
Ka is a wheel. The Japanese proverb, if there is love, smallpox scars are as pretty as dimples. We're not going to spoil anything, but this absolutely references Sadie, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the overall, like, there is no perfect world where bad things don't happen. Like that doesn't exist.
The last one is arguably a hook in itself of this book, the theme at least. Dancing is life. And King discusses this one with Footman.
When you say Footman, I think you're saying Bookman. Like
Bookman.
Seinfeld.
Yeah, Bookman.
Same. Yeah.
Yeah. The Tropic of Cancer, is that it is? Tropic of Capricorn. It's one of those. So a lot of this has to do with King's relationship to music. He says to Footman, the Tesco blog, by the way, I've always been a pop music fan. I have a good grasp of music between 1955 and now. It's just one of the places where my head feels at home. It's also one of the indicators of how American life changes and what's going on at any particular time. One of the epigrams for 11/22/63 is dancing is life, and dancing is something that has always interested me. It's symbolic in so many ways of the courting ritual. The changes in dancing mirror the changes in the way we court and love and live over the years. I went to YouTube to watch videos of dances from the 50s and 60s, and that was an interesting thing, to watch people do the stroll and the Madison, the Lindy Hop, Hell's a Poppin', fantastic stuff. I'm crazy about music and I'm crazy about dancing, and some of that's in the book. And then he kind of talks about music that he was in. I love this sentiment, and I think that all of us have music backgrounds, and I think most of us would agree that that's probably at the foremost of pop culture to show the changes. Well, I would even say over film, because it's coming from the soul. It's coming from and it hits us in personal ways. So I do think that this is an interesting hook onto the book, in addition to paralleling the joys you would have with those that you love. So any other thoughts on the Dancing is Life?
I think, well, it's interesting that they're filming Life of Chuck right now too.
I was going to say, it resurfaces in Life of Chuck.
Exactly. It's going to come again. But I have all of these really interesting like theories about, well, they're not all come from me, but about like church services where you all sing together, because I think anything that you do with a common goal and you're involving your body and you're doing the same thing as the person next to you, it's a really unifying thing. And I think dancing is the same, because like we can talk about partner dancing as a courting ritual, but also like line dancing or step dancing or like ballet, it's just really interesting. And it's a physical as well as like artistic thing. Like you really get your body involved in it.
Yeah.
Too.
Can I say I was on jury duty once for a strip club case where a woman was accused of performing sex acts on stage. And one of the expert witnesses over this 2-day trial was an anthropology professor from University of Maryland to discuss dance as an expression of sexuality and connection. Ooh. And I thought that was so fascinating. And some of my fellow jurors were like, oh, how could you have a degree in dance? And I was like, I thought that was the highlight of the trial. Like,
yeah, I also want to hear way more about that trial.
Yeah, and it's, well, I'll tell you off mic.
Oops, I'll take
not guilty, by the way. But also when they're saying like, oh, looking at the evolution of dance from 50s to 60s, you're like, but dance has historically been very sexualized, often naked, if you're going back to caveman days.
Well, think about Elvis Presley too, like with the
Elvis the pelvis. But so it became sort of sanitized in this period of time for America, which is why I think it's looked back on fondly, because it's like, oh, we were so innocent. You're like, yeah, but everything leading up to that was kind of like death, destruction. This was just the first time that we were like, oh, we're putting it on TV, so let's, we're doing the twist. But how is that any different than like shake your ass? It's all just coded. But yeah, so that's my take on dance as life.
For more sexual dancing, seek out Damien Chazelle's Babylon, where you can see how people danced in the 20s.
I thought you were about to drop your OnlyFans link, Mike.
Oh well, I'm actually, that's why I have the mustache now. I'm starting an OnlyFans. It's going to be me dancing like
70s themed.
Yeah. Do we want to talk a little bit about the Under the Dome 11/22 ideas stemming back from the past? I know I held back on it earlier, Randall, when you were mentioning it.
I think just very simply, it's a lot easier to do that depth of research, because Under the Dome he talked about that too, research was the daunting aspect of it, because he kept trying to figure out what would happen weather-wise in the dome, and it was like overwhelming in terms of like the, you know, the weather aspect. And so when you're rich enough to be able to afford research assistants, it really helps in that regard. But also, I think what's more interesting is this whole idea, because you have this quote where King says, that's what it is, tie up the loose ends. That's not to say that I have any premonition that I'm going to die or anything like that. These things have been there for a long time. Now is the time to do them if I'm going to do them at all. I'm not getting any younger. I might have 10 productive years left, or I might not. And I think even though he says, like, you know, the whole thing about like, I don't think I'm going to die, you can still see the terror of the death. I think like the fear of death that you know arose in him after the accident, because he finished the Dark Tower primarily because he was like, well, I need to finish this before I die. And I think he still is in that mindset of like, I got to wrap everything up because I could die at any minute. And you know, so
yeah, that's a good take. The one thing I thought was cool is to wrap up the hook here is the parallel to the Dead Zone. King told Errol Morris, this book is in a way like a photo negative of my novel, The Dead Zone. In that book, Johnny Smith is the guy in the high place with the rifle who feels like he's seen the future. He's seen this guy, Greg Stilson, and he sees what he's going to do when he becomes president because he has this precog talent. And he feels like he has to kill him. At the last moment, fate intervenes. I got really uncomfortable with the idea of saying, well, under certain circumstances, assassination is a good thing. And in this book is a good chance to do it the other way and to take the assassination back. There's actually a lot of parallels I see to some of his greatest hits, and we'll get into them in a section later. But the next section we have to go to is a quick one. Structure and format.
Look at me. Look at me, teacher.
Pretty self-explanatory. Guy goes back in the past. He comes back in the present. We follow him linearly. I think that's it.
No big flourishes in this one.
It's a book. You read the first page first, and then the next one, and then
yeah. And in those pages, we find what do we find? We find some descriptions of the 50s, but we also find some heroes and villains.
I'm gonna have to kill this fucking clown. Welcome to the Losers Club, asshole!
All right, you know it. Heroes and villains. We're going to be talking about the characters within 11/22/63. All of them. No, I'm just joking. We're talking about the primary characters. Hey, John Travolta has primary colors. I have primary characters here. And the primary characters of the first 97 pages are really Jake Epping, Al Templeton, and on the peripheral, Harry Dunning, who we'll certainly learn more about later, and the Yellow Card Man. Let's talk about Jake first. We know him as this guy that's going through a pretty tumultuous time in his life. He's a teacher. He's living in Lisbon Falls. He's just divorced. He says he's not a crying man. So he hasn't found that emotional spark. Perhaps that's the thing that's blocking him, that's inhibiting him from living. I found the introduction for Jake pretty strong here. And I think that the way that you learn about Jake really sets the foundation for what the threads are going to be for this novel. I think by showing him where he's at in school, you get the introduction to Dunning. You really get to kind of find out what he's missing in life. And I think that right there is a nice thread to pull on without expressing it that explicitly.
Yeah, he seems bored, like he's aimless. Yeah. And I think the fact that Al gives him a mission, right? Jake would have never thought to go save Kennedy, but for Al being like, hey, here's something you could do with your life. It's after the divorce. He's not a crying man. He does feel like he's kind of coasting, right? Yeah. Even when he's teaching the classes, he seems bored. It's the sense of ennui that's just kind of, I don't know, until he has something to live for, he really is just kind of drifting.
And Jen, you wanted to talk a bit about his relationship, because he's coming off of a divorce, and there's a very interesting characteristic that King puts on the page here.
It really is. This is, of course, from my perspective, just with addiction, that's the thing that I zeroed in on in this. And I think it's really interesting because he's talking about his wife, Christy, or his ex-wife, Christy, who is just out of rehab. And unless I'm forgetting somebody, it's the first time I think we have ever seen the other side of this, other than something like Dolores Claiborne, where her husband is just an asshole, and also happens to be an alcoholic too. But like, we see his reaction to Christy going to rehab, and I wonder if he's kind of channeling what he imagines Tabby was feeling when he went to rehab. It's also a female alcoholic too, or a female alcoholic in recovery. And I think what we tend to get with King is male alcoholics or male characters in recovery, because that's his frame of reference. So I think it's really interesting. And I just pulled every section where he's talking about her, because I think one thing that strikes me is there seems to be like an element of annoyance or anger, which I can completely understand, and I'm not judging that at all. I just think it's interesting. So he says throughout this 90 pages, he says, my ex-wife said that my non-existent emotional gradient was the main reason she was leaving me, as if the guy she met in her AA meetings was beside the point. And then I was unable to feel my feelings in AA speak. And then even when you told me I had to go to rehab or you were leaving, that's what Christy says. This conversation happened about 6 weeks before she packed her things, drove them across town, and moved in with Mel Thompson. Boy meets girl on the AA campus. That's another saying they have in those meetings. It was not long after Christy got out of rehab, and I suppose if I was thinking anything, it was to hope that I'd come home and find her sober, which I did. She held on to her sobriety better than she held on to her husband. And then on page 82, my wife was just out of rehab. I was hoping that she'd be home when I got there, and I wouldn't have to spend an hour on the phone before locating her and fishing her out of the local water hole, which I have done that with my first husband, and it sucks. But I think like I see King kind of like angry with himself as a younger man, or like kind of trying to imagine what it was like for Tabby. I also think it's interesting because one of the things they tell you when you first get sober is not to date anybody. Mm-hmm. So part of me is like, is this something that happened in one of his meetings? And that's where this inspiration came from. But I do think it's really interesting for Jake to be coming from this perspective, because he does kind of have this aimless quality. And I wonder if taking care of Christy was his goal or his reason for kind of getting up and going through the day. With that gone, now there's a vacuum in his life, and this is what comes.
And that in turn, his obsession with just being that, her being his project, certainly probably fed into that feeling, because there was nothing else there beyond that. It was just right. There was the emotional void that she talks about is very telling here, and I think that is the real springboard that we need to give us some sort of soul in this story beyond just the hook of, oh, he's going to go back and change the past or whatever. It's like, no, there's an absolute human condition that's being examined here, which honestly, like, I think I feel like King's done this forever, but to really get into the nuance and the nooks and crannies of it, I think of like Hearts in Atlantis being one that's a big one. I think Dolores Claiborne for sure, but even especially like Lisey's story. I think that a lot of the weeds that he gets into for Jake here ties into some of his writing for Lisey's story, where he's able to kind of extrapolate the personal, but also kind of get into the more literary, dramatic side of characterization that I think is really important, which is why I think Jake is not a Barbie or a Stu. I think he's actually a newer protagonist that maybe more like a Johnny Smith, really, if you think about it.
Totally agree. And one of the things that I love is I think another writer would have introduced this character and this inability to cry as a masculinity thing. And like, I'm too manly to cry. And I love that that's not what it is. It's just like, this is not how I express emotion. And I also wonder if there's a numbness after being married to an alcoholic that has kind of crept in, and he doesn't want to access those emotions. Not that he can't.
Yeah. Yeah. I put in the comments, like, he reminds me more of Edgar Fremantle, the way that marriage is handled, where
I can see that.
Starts and you get the reasons, there's a divorce, but we don't really, that's not really the story here, right? We want to establish that this is a divorced person who's moving on and finding some inspiration elsewhere. So I think he's more of that versus a Barbie who's maybe more of a drifter type.
Yeah.
Or Stu, who I think has like a very strong moral compass. I don't think Edgar or Jake have that moral compass necessarily until they're put into a stressful position to become a hero, right? The hero arises. It wasn't always within them, but they had to figure out how to become that.
Yeah.
I just like
More
the
the
idea of
Larry
somebody
Davis
who
do.
is like born in the like. Also, there's a melancholy to him, and then it's like he thrives in another era. You know, like the idea that you were born into the wrong era and you're genuinely happier in another time period, which is what I feel like that's kind of almost a fantasy of a lot of people is like, oh, I would have been so much happier in the 70s or whatever, which, you know, may or may not be true, but it's interesting to consider.
It's interesting too, because like that same year, Midnight in Paris comes out, which has a lot of sentiments to that notion. Considers that notion of just like, oh, I would have thrived in this time period and all, which I think this book makes a little bit more of an argument that he actually does thrive more in the 50s in this, anyway. Let's talk about Al real quick though, because what I love about Al is that it's doing the thing that King does best, is when you have the elder statesman kind of showing something. I got a lot of Lewis Creed and Judd vibes from the two of them together. Yeah. The fact that he knows this secret, he's letting him in on this secret, but then he tasks him in a way that Judd doesn't do. But still, the mechanics are there. And it's like, if he reminds me a little bit of Johnny Smith at the Dead Zone, and certainly the love story there reminds me of it. It's interesting that he's hitting on another greatest hit with this relationship dynamic that certainly recalls that, in Pet Sematary, which is, I think we'd all agree is a top 5 for us. So there's a lot of greatest hits happening without it being explicitly greatest hits material. And I just think it's just like him leaning on what he knows works best. And I think Al, as this conduit for him and for the story, it's enough for me. I know that, but Randall, you'd mentioned earlier that like there is some like clunkiness to Al that
he just becomes when he's a character, he's interesting. When he becomes a vessel for explicating King's research on the Oswald Kennedy thing, I think something is lost.
Like Basil exposition.
I agree. Like and not to get too spoilery, but how soon he leaves the novel on the reread, I was like, wow, he's really not in it for that much. He just sort of is what puts Jake in motion, right? He kind of gets the wheels going, starts the engine up.
But it's his journal that continues through the story, I think, too, which is, that research piece.
It'd be like if Judd welcomed them and was like, hey, there's the Pet Cemetery behind your house. Well, I'm going to, me and Norma are leaving.
Or he got run over by a truck on the road.
It's like, do you want my book collection?
How Al goes, like he has the power to go back in time, so he uses it to go buy cheap beef.
Yeah.
Right.
Like
there's this altruism too. He's like, I don't want to charge more. I just want to make good burgers.
Not to say I'm criminal minded, but again, I would find the richest bank near the portal so that if I had to run from the cops, I could just immediately jump back with all the money. Whereas he gets discounts on ground beef.
See, I'd like you talk about wanting to commit crimes. Like I'd go back, I'd like kill someone just to like know what it feels like, and then I'd come back.
But because you also know they're going to reset, right? So
that'll be fine.
It's kind of a free pass.
You know the meme that's like, if I win the lottery, I'm not going to say anything, but there will be signs. If like by the end of this series, Dan is living in like a mansion in like France, and Randall has like grown a sinister mustache or something.
Yeah, and
we're gonna know y'all found a rabbit hole.
Me and Randall are gonna bust up the joint.
Right, and me and Mike will just have read and watched everything we ever wanted to.
Yeah,
or Mike would just be living in the 70s.
Oh no, I'd be gone. I'd just be like, who is that guy again?
Mike just wants to go to Caddyshack opening night.
I want to go to Caddyshack opening day. I'm going to get there in 58, and I'm just going to be like, God, what am I going to do for all this time? And I'm just going to live rent free somewhere. Anyway,
just go see every good stand up live.
I will.
Richard Pryor, he's going places.
Well, I'm going to go to actually what I would
be right all the time instead of making money off of it.
What I'd do is I'd go to the UK and I'd hang out in Liverpool bars, and then when I saw McCartney and Lennon and all them, I would just linger around and be like, hey, do you guys need a manager? And that's what would happen. So 2 other characters, because again, look, I know you're probably thinking this is kind of a surface level read on these characters. We have 5 more episodes. 5 more episodes. We are going to be talking about these characters nonstop because
we're going to pull so many passages.
Yes, because we have
we
so
kept this
much.
one brief.
Yeah, we did. We kept it brief because we had to get to the nitty gritty of the history. So if you're thinking like, oh, there's not a lot to talk about Jake yet, we got 97 pages. There's not a lot to talk about. We have fucking 700 more, so we're going to get to it. Yeah. And we're certainly going to get to these other characters. So let's just keep it cursory here. But Harry Dunning, I feel like we all know have had a Harry Dunning in our life at some point. I know I've in my school, there were certainly janitors that I was actually really friendly with, and I thought they were really cool, and we'd talk about stuff. And there was this sort of melancholy feeling that King kind of puts there too, because I think a lot of it's coming from his own experience because he was a janitor at one point. I think there's a sadness that I understand and I relate to, and I think it's a timeless sadness. I think we always will have these type of characters in our lives. So I do actually think that Dunning is another good conduit for story here. That we're obviously going to be talking about a shit ton in the next section because that's really all about his family. But any thoughts, at least in these 97 pages, about Harry Dunning?
Well, he's like the perfect, like the emotional what if.
Yeah.
Like what if this hadn't happened? How would this one person's life be changed? Which I think is a really interesting microcosm compared to what would the world be like if JFK hadn't been assassinated.
Yeah. Any other?
I think of the Neil Young, the Keep on Rockin' in the Free World.
Yeah,
like the one less kid who will get to go to school, get to have friends, get to be cool. There are people that you meet that just sadly you're like, man, this person just had like the deck stacked against them so much. And I think it's really great and touching for me, at least. It was the first emotional impact I had was Jake giving him the A+.
Yeah.
And just him being like, this is like the first time I've won. It's the first time luck shined on me for a second. And I think it's cool that Jake recognizes it's not the most well-written thing, but it's so truthful and honest that the grammar doesn't really matter. It's the message underneath. And I think that's even speaks to King. He loves to talk about different authors and write it. He clearly is obsessed with just reading constantly. So him seeing something truthful and just recognizing it as beautiful, and especially with Jake, who just seems like he's so over it. He's just mailing it in.
Yeah.
And then this guy just, for whatever reason, just really, it just spoke to him and touched him in the way that he hasn't felt emotional in a long time.
Yeah.
Well, and to see how he is able to be happy with what he has also, which I think is something Jake is going to discover later on in the novel.
Randall, any thoughts on Mr. Dunning?
Seems like a real jerk.
Well, here's another
car is green.
One other jerk that we have to kind of quickly talk about, the Yellow Card Man. Again, we're going to go into full depth with him just as he gets evolved, but kind of creepy. I did want to ask you, Fligger, though, when you first read this book and this character appeared, did your immediate thoughts go to Midworld?
Oh, yeah. I thought he might have been Tahine. And obviously we have like men in yellow coats.
Oh.
That's what I thought of initially.
Yeah. There's something, and I have some theories that I'll divulge in other episodes. Stay tuned. But yeah, there's something very, I think of him as a warning, and I just think of him as like the rot and the fact that he looks like he's dying. Like he doesn't look well. His mind is gone. And even the card is changing color. And it's like that idea of like you're being radiated. Yeah. And there's just a sickness to this time travel that, Jake could become the Yellow Card Man if he's not careful. And I think Al's, illness clearly was accelerated, not just from the time he spent in the past, but just the process of going. I think it does something to the body that's irreversible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about
I think of his killer violin solo on the Spider-Man 2 soundtrack.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well,
sorry.
Nice.
It comes into my head every time we talk about Yellow Card Man.
It's a good one. It's a good one.
It is a good song and a good soundtrack.
Well, wait, I see another character.
There's a Yellow Card song. Yeah.
Holy shit. It's Annie Wilkes, and she's holding a book. In the book, it's Misery.
She died. She just slipped away.
Slipped away? Slipped away? She didn't just slip away. You did it. 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 You murdered my Misery.
Annie.
All right, real quick. I think this is probably going to be a fast one just because I honestly couldn't really find too much on here. But round robin, what is one thing, one dour aspect of this stretch of the 97 pages we have here? Randall, what was one thing that you didn't like?
I think very briefly, just like the way that Al sort of like serves as this "don't make me explain," like the time travel shit. Like he's like, I don't know, let's move on.
Yeah,
it's not misery, it's just funny, and it like I said, I kind of came around on the time travel stuff, but there is this like Al in that scene becomes king.
Yeah.
In the sense that he's like, here's my JFK research. Conspiracy theorists are insane, and don't ask me any deeper questions about the time travel.
Yeah.
Like just have fun.
It's like when the sci-fi, what was that? There was like a sci-fi movie that came out where it was just like, oh yeah, all we have to do is write a line about how something works, and then
exactly.
Yeah.
Don't pull on that thread.
Yeah.
It's something with the Mayans,
Yeah. Jen, what about you? Is there something that you were like, fuck this book?
I don't have anything. Like, I was originally thinking about talking about Christie in this section, but like, I don't think I dislike it. I just think like some of it, as somebody who's been in that situation, kind of like, oh shit, King sees me. But yeah, I don't really have anything.
What about you, Fluger?
Yeah, I'm struggling to think of something. I guess it's the exposition is a little strange, but we kind of had to see. It's like the end of the school year, right? Things are wrapping up, but you kind of had to have that to understand, Jake teaching adult education, right? So to me, it all like fits pretty well. I don't really have any complaints here.
I do lose the track of what day of the year it is. Like he's talking about two different like educational moments in time, and I get them mixed up
because it has the 2 years later thing. It's just like, wait, what? We're like, it's like 2 pages into the book. It's like
right.
2 years later.
I think it gets moving pretty quickly, and it's you have to have a little bit of that. Okay, let's setting.
Table setting,
yeah. But it gets going pretty quick.
Well, it does, and who else is pretty quick is Stephen King, especially when he's behind a word processor, and especially if it's the word processor of the gods.
And we're gonna make a new rule. Whenever I'm in here, you hear me typing. Whether you don't hear me typing, what the fuck you hear me doing in here, when I'm in here, that means that I am working. That means don't come in. Now, do you think you can handle that?
Yeah.
Fine. Why don't you start right now and get the fuck out of here?
Again, 97 pages. Not a lot here to lean on, but there has to be a few passages at least. Let's go with one each. Given the span of page lengths, I don't think there's enough to go around 3 times, but let's do one each. Jen, what was one passage that you thought was just boom, he nailed it?
I really liked the root beer part. On page 38, he opened an ice cream freezer and removed a frosty mug roughly the size of a lemonade pitcher. He filled it from a tap, and I could smell the root beer, rich and strong. He scraped the foam off the top of the handle of a wooden spoon, then filled it all the way to the top and set it down on the counter. There you go. That in the paper's 18 cents, plus a penny for the governor. I sipped, and then I'm skipping. I sipped through the foam on top and was amazed. It was full, tasty all the way through. I don't know how to express it any better than that. This 50 years gone world smelled worse than I ever would have expected, but it tasted a whole hell of a lot better. I just like we've talked about the implications of that, but I really like the way he wrote that. Also, I love root beer, so it made me want one.
I do too.
Yeah, I'm thinking I'm gonna get
put some vanilla ice cream in.
I might actually get a cat burger after this. This will be good.
Ooh.
Randall,
not
do you have
a real cat.
Do you have a passage that you outlined?
I just love the whole intro. I think like the whole prologue, like the introduction to Jake is one of the better introductions for a character I think I've read. I think it's just like a really beautiful, emotionally potent, like intro to that character. I'm like instantly on his wavelength, and that's impressive.
In a way, it feels like reading the early section of On Writing, when he's kind of going through the beats of his own life and how it's kind of informed him. Yeah. It feels like a little microcosm of that.
Yeah, there's a lot of like one-liners that feel very in line with like some of his best stuff in The Body and Shawshank. But I do love is just how King is able to often really nail like the process or the feeling or something that's happening so that we can understand fully on our end. And that's on like page 27. He's like, But what had I found? What exactly was I experiencing? The power of suggestion seemed the most likely answer, since no matter what I felt, I could see my foot on the floor. And this is when Jake's walking through the first time. Except, you know how on a bright day, you can close your eyes and see an after image of whatever you were just looking at? It was like that. When I looked at my foot, I saw it on the floor. But when I blinked, either a millisecond before or a millisecond after my eyes closed, I couldn't tell which. I caught a glimpse of my foot on a step. And it wasn't in the dim light of a 60-watt bulb either. It was in bright sunshine. That's such a cool way of describing the thinny, if you want to call it that he's going through. And he's good at that. Like, you know, sometimes it doesn't always work. Like a lot of the stuff in the Wastelands, I'm like, what are you fucking talking about? But I think when he nails it, it's like, yeah, good. This is visual storytelling. This is awesome. Well, what's not so awesome is this creep I'm feeling. It's getting kind of chilly. And no, we didn't leave the freezer door open. It's because right next to Al's diner is the cemetery.
What's the bottom of the truth?
Well, sometimes that is better. The person you put up there ain't the person that comes back. It may look like that person, but it ain't that person. Because whatever lives in the ground beyond that cemetery ain't human at all.
Spooky stuff in this book, or not in the book, but in the 97 pages. I think we're a little limited here, but if anyone's got something scary, throw it out. Jen, I think you said something, or Flieger, do you have one?
Yeah, it ties into word processor, but it's a little bit of a foreboding when he's seeing the pantry for the first time, and Al asks him, he's like, "What do you smell?" "Spices mostly, coffee, maybe air freshener too. I'm not sure." "Uh-huh. I use Glade because of the other smell." "Are you saying you don't smell anything else?" "Yeah, there's something kind of sulfury. It makes me think of burnt matches." It made him think of poison gas my family had put on my mom's. The poison gas my mom. Also makes me think of the poison gas I and my family had put out after my mom's Saturday night bean suppers, but I didn't like to say so. Did cancer treatments also make you fart? It's sulfur. Other stuff too. None of it should know number 5. It's the smell of the mill, buddy. It's that matter of factness of the Yankee, the very Maine, and it's, you know, it's a place where food is stored, but it's like, wait, no, something is off here. And the smell of sulfur is one of the most repulsive smells I can think of. So just the idea that he's going in there and it's like, well, you already are being told, your senses are warning you, this is not a good place to be.
Yeah.
And I don't know, to me, that was the sense of foreboding was like, oh, that's something bad's going to happen.
And he's good at that. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Jen, what about you?
I had 2 things that I'm not going to read, but I have when he goes back and reads the essay and he talks about the crime, and just it's just so horrifying, and the blood that he keeps coughing it, like thinking about having to have a maxi pad for that much blood coming out of you, of your mouth, and just.
And that ties into like King's own fears of just the body of just like decaying and having nothing to do about it. He talks with us about that with the Dreamcatcher. Randall.
I don't really have anything for Cemetery or Pound Cake, really.
I don't. I definitely don't for Pound Cake. For this, the only one that I thought was actually kind of creepy is just how, and again, King's so fucking good at doing this, is just showing how the past is obdurate, which we haven't gotten to that saying yet, I don't think, but we've certainly hinted at it. So like on page 76, when he's like, something doesn't want it to be changed. I'm pretty sure of that, but it can be. If you can take the resistance into account, it can be. Al was looking at me, eyes bright in his haggard face. All in all, the story of Caroline Pullen ends with, and she lived happily ever after, wouldn't you say? And just that whole story of the way that you can reset it and she could have this great life with that she can walk, and there's the other one where she's gotten shot and is in a wheelchair. It's just that the especially tied with Al's kind of insistence that time is almost a character in itself, which King does really good at, you know, especially when he talks about like, when he kind of hints at the Wendigo and like Pet Sematary, like that stuff is spooky to me. And I think King's really good at just, you know, giving us a little to make us think about a lot. And one of those thoughts sometimes for me is like, God, I'm fucking hungry. I just need a snack. And I'll be honest, the corporate overlords gave me a pumpkin bread earlier this morning, and I'm out of it. But I'm not in the mood for pumpkin bread. I'm in the mood for some pound cake.
After all you've been taught, everyone isn't bad, Mama. Everything isn't a sin. Come to your closet and pray. Ask to be forgiven.
He's a nice boy, Mom. You like him. You really like him, Mama.
And God damn it, I don't see any in the fridge. Does anyone else see it?
I mean, you could maybe talk about the coughing blood there's a little bit of overlap in there, but no, I didn't have anything. Except for the scene where Jake and Al fuck in the pantry.
Oh, shit. I forgot about that. Yeah, that was...
Scene is super hot.
Yeah, it's like,
You smell that, Jake?
Well, and there's also like him talking about the sulfur, the bean, when you eat too much beans, But
Yeah.
there's nothing really.
Well, let's just say we are going to get some pound cake because the namesake of the section is from this book. And
you'll be feasting later.
It's going to be feasting. But for now, though, all right. Well, I'm kind of bummed out. We don't have much to eat, but who needs to eat when you're roaming around King's Dominion?
There's another world out there.
I know there is.
There is a lot of King's Dominion in this for the 97. So I think we don't have to read passages, but we could kind of just call them out real quick. Flieger, what was one that you saw?
Just the what's his name again? Sorry, the janitor. His father dying in Shawshank Prison.
Yeah,
stomach injury or stomach infection.
Lots of locations. Randall,
Plymouth Fury.
Yeah, Christine, which is in the miniseries, I believe too.
Mm-hmm.
I believe they have that. Jen, what's another King's Dominion?
Well, this is the not so obvious one of the two that I found is when he's talking about the phrases that he hates as a writer. It reminded me of that tweet that I always hear in my head when anybody writes for a long moment or at the end of the day. And those aren't the words he said, but that's I don't know if that counts or not, but page 57.
There is Flieger already mentioned it, but the jaunt with like the close your eyes, that seems very, pointed in that.
Called them jaunts too.
He does. Yeah. Yeah. What else?
We have Al living at number 19.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
19 Bluebird Lane.
That's where George Amberson.
$1.19 for the cost.
Yeah. He kind of goes overboard with the 19 already in the first 97.
Oh, I know. And there's also,
funny.
mentions of Derry Haven and Castle Rock. So.
Yeah. So we get some locations. He's having fun with the locations here in addition to the ones that he actually lived in. The one that I thought was really funny and cheeky, although probably a little problematic now, is that at one point they're talking about the failed attempts to kill Hitler. And I think it's Al or maybe Jake says, I'd seen that movie too. And that movie is Bryan Singer's Valkyrie, and Bryan Singer directed Apt Pupil, which Jen, you just talked about with
we did. Yeah, we talked about it in Harkwares. There's also, that's about Nazis too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Anything else? No? Yeah. The only other thing I saw was just the root beer is clearly a big part of Hearts in Atlantis, which I think clearly King just fucking got off on root beer in the 50s because it stayed with him. It's like in multiple books and stuff, so that's fun.
I think it might be in Carrie too.
I think so.
Like the fruit company.
Yeah. Yeah, that's about it. That's all I got. Although there was one weird thing that, like, we talked about Albert Dunton from the founder of Dunton Jewelry being real earlier, but there is an Eleanor Dunton in it. She's like a friend of Sonia Kasprek. So I wonder if the Dunton name, because of the Dunton Jewelry that he had known in Lisbon Falls, was just stuck with him. And I have to imagine it did.
Yeah.
Well, it's time to leave King's Dominion, but we're certainly not leaving this book because we're not going to be doing final thoughts yet. That's 5 episodes later. Remember, this is going to be a 6-episode series. Instead, let's tease what's next. So you're going to hear Randall speak to Brendan James. You think you've teased a lot already on that.
Yeah, I'll just say that conversation, more than my one with Jim DiEugenio, is we talk about the sourcing that King used. We talk about Kennedy. We talk about conspiracy theories. We also just talk about the book because Brendan is a big Stephen King fan. So he talks about his journey with King and also his thoughts on 11/22. But since, politics is his thing and, he's a co-host of Blowback and, very noted researcher and writer, he's just really smart about politics. And we talk a lot about sort of King's political evolution throughout the years, from, kind of the hippie days in college to, kind of where he's at now. And it's a pretty interesting thing to look at, I think, in the context of his books. And it is, to me, a relevant discussion considering the fact that a lot of that stuff has bled into the work. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Especially in this book. So yeah, I think it's a great conversation. I'm very excited for people to hear it.
Well, we dropped this in 11/22 because unlike King, we actually did want to tie it to the anniversary. And it is the anniversary. It's 60 years, 11/22/23. It's now been 60 years since that fateful day in Dallas. And we decided to start the series then. You know, you can thank us later. You can thank us after the series is done because we're back the following week on our regular programming on Friday with, we got another regular Friday drop for part 2 of 11/22/63, which is The Janitor's Father, which sees us losers back in our alma mater, Derry, Maine. And who will be joining us? Well, Jen and Flieger here. We are certainly going to be on that journey, and we have another special guest who is a loser. So, because everyone wanted to be on this series, so we had to shake it up this way, and it's going to be fun. And you're going to have to tune in. But for now, just follow us on socials for any updates. There's a lot of updates going on. We just did a whole Hollywood King episode last week or 2 weeks ago that showed you how many headlines are out, and there's still some coming up. So definitely follow on socials for all the news and just to kind of see where we're at, because we are going to be doing some fun little special events here and there, maybe some trivia, maybe some other pop-up things that we're thinking of to eventize this a little bit more. You could also join our Patreon for more content beyond 11/22. You know, if you're thinking like, look, I've read that book, or maybe I haven't read that book, it's a little daunting, I'm going to get to it later, but you still want that Losers Club content, we're going to have some in the Patreon. So www.patreon.com/thebarons, you'll get some more content there. But you know, what we really want are some bright red Pennywise clown noses. So why don't you just leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and talk about how cool it is that, you know, one of your favorite Stephen King podcasts are dedicating so many episodes to one of your favorite books, just like they did on your other favorite book that has Derry in it. So I think we deserve the clown noses. It's a time of giving. It's a season of giving. So give back a little bit. Anyway, until then, we'll be seeing you in 2 minutes or over long days
and pleasant nights.
I got some hot friends. God, I got some hot friends. I got some hot friends. God, I got some hot friends. But you know you want somebody to treat you good.
This is the end of our show. For now. Tune in next week. If you like our programming, consider searching for other bloody disgusting podcasts, such as Creepy, Horror Queers, The Boo Crew, SCP Archives, Nightlight, Margaret's Garden, and more.